I'm a Christian scholar specializing in theology, and today I want to review a recent debate between one atheist and 20 Christian women. This is kind of similar to the format you might see with the Jubilee video, although it's not on the Jubilee channel. So the point of this is to go through, look at the arguments that the atheist is making, look at the counter arguments and arguments that the Christians are making, and critique them all and see how they could have done better and try to be objective in my evaluation of this. Now, I want to say going into this, if one of the women who is in there happens to come upon this video, if I critique you in this, I am not doing this to be mean. So I think of this video as like if you're in a sport like football or something, you might watch your games with the coach afterwards to look at what you might have done better. I used to do a lot of chess. So in a chess game, maybe you go back and you go by piece or move by move in the game and you see like, okay, I was doing here, but I blundered here with this piece and this is how this shifted the game. And you do that to learn better going forward. I am someone with an extensive background in areas related to this, and I think I can, bring good commentary here. So if I am getting a little snarky with you, no, I mean it, and this is like me being your friendly neighborhood, kind of sarcastic theology coach, all right? So with that said, we're going to hop right into it. Now, actually, before we hop into it, I do have something I want to say about the general format of these type of things, right? So I'm going to go ahead and move myself to the top left of the screen through the magic of television. And a while back, I put out a video critiquing the format of Jubilee videos, the whole 1 versus 20 thing, and I went into a pretty decently in-depth analysis of how these type of formats, they are not conducive for good, productive conversations. They are not conducive for getting to the truth for a variety of reasons. I'll put a kind of picture of that other video up so people can find it if they want. So I'll give a couple of examples of some power dynamics and systematic dynamics in this conversation that are going to affect the ability for this to be something that gets good dialogue going, gets people to the truth, so on and so forth. So first off, the woman who you see in front of her, the atheist, she gets to set the stage. She gets to present the arguments and plan beforehand what topic she wants to debate. I don't know about this format. I know with Jubilee videos, the people who are coming, they have no clue what the conversation is going to be on. They might know they're talking to an atheist, but they have to kind of try to prep a wide variety of potential areas if they're going to try to prep for it. So already there's a power dynamic imbalance because she gets extensive prep time and she knows what she's going to get to talk on, whereas the others don't. Another area that makes this really problematic is because this format is one person versus 20 or one person versus 4, as we're going to see here in a second. That makes it difficult to have a dialogue because the different people who are in the group, they butt into each other. So if you've ever seen a Jubilee video, they get to vote each other off. They get to break up the conversation periodically. And so one line of thought can get derailed or sidetracked by the other, so on and so forth. So I say all this so that people understand when I say, if you choose to go do one of these things, you need to realize this is not a friendly neighborhood dialogue. You cannot approach this like this. The second you agree to do something like this, you have to recognize you are stepping into a game show. That's it. That's what you're doing. The goal of this is not good, conducive dialogue. The goal of this is not, oh, hey, we're actually going to get closer to the truth. You have to recognize that in this situation, you are playing a game and you have to play to win. I'm sorry, like that's just the truth of it. In this scenario, it is set up in a way in which Christianity is under fire, Christianity is, being attacked, and you can't come at this playing a different game than what's being played. You can't play a chess game thinking that you're playing checkers, and so you have to recognize going into this is in many ways a rhetorical game. It just the aspects of the system you're stepping into are that way, and that's going to be relevant to some of the things I said. Now, the second thing I want to point out here is I haven't seen actually this whole thing. I watched a few minutes in the beginning, maybe less, like 5 or 10 minutes, and I was like, yeah, this will be good for me to do a review video on. And I've only gotten a few snippets here and out as I was like checking my sound and whatnot. If you are going to accept to get up and do something like this, you had better know your stuff. You should not put yourself up into this type of position and be the prominent vocal defense of Christianity if you don't know philosophy, theology, biblical, like if you don't know the subject under debate. And I'm going to be honest and harsh on some of the women who get up here. They don't know what they're doing. I'm not saying that to be mean, like they don't know how to engage in a philosophical argumentation. So if you're going to do this, one, you need to know your stuff. If you don't feel like, hey, I'm really competent, I know what I'm doing here, sit down, let somebody else do it, okay? Second thing, if you are going to get up and do it, know that this is somewhere where you have to play. This is a debate game. This isn't a friendly neighborhood conversation. So with that said, we're going to go back to the beginning and we're going to start working our way through this.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Dr. Daff Show. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Daff, and today we're having a conversation with one atheist and 20 Christians. I'm here today with Casey, and she created her own prompts. So Casey, Let us know what your first prompt is.
Because suffering exists, an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing deity cannot exist.
Okay, so it becomes apparent to me very quickly in this. This woman is just your everyday internet atheist. Like, she really doesn't know what she's doing. She's not philosophically informed, which means that if any of these women were just even moderately, had like a sophomore level, like, understanding of some issues in philosophy of religion as it relates to problem of evil and, arguments for God and stuff, I feel like they would be able to handle her very, very well, at least one-on-one. The group dynamics are going to throw it off a little bit. So right off the bat here, she says, because suffering exists and all good, all powerful, all knowing deity cannot exist. She's presenting an argument. Now, this is, I think, a rhetorical blunder on her part. Now, in a situation like this, it is always easier to play the skeptic, just in general. It's always easier to let somebody else try to present their arguments and poke holes in their arguments and challenge them to support their premises and things like that. So in this situation, she's putting herself into the position where she's advancing an argument. And it seems like she's advancing a logical problem of evil. So notice that she said, because suffering exists, an all good, all powerful, all knowing deity cannot exist. So this seems to be, she's saying it's like logically incompatible or something along those lines. This is a very strong argument that she's actually not going to be able to support because it's a non sequitur. So to explain why this is the case, I'm going to pull up good old Microsoft Word, and we're going to look at what a syllogism might look like. So a syllogism, like a logical argument, might look something like this in a deductive argument. If P, then Q. P, therefore Q. So this is a modus ponens. This is like if you take like an intro to philosophy class in college, this is one of the, if you take an intro to logic class or something like that in college, this is something you're going to learn about pretty quick, right? This is a deductive argument. And the idea here is if the premises are true, the conclusion logically follows. So this is a valid argument. The truth of the premises necessitates the truth of the conclusion, right? But now suppose I did something like this. If P, then Q, A, therefore Q. This is no longer valid. This doesn't follow anymore, right? Because if P and then Q, that being true and A being true, well, it doesn't follow from this. Like, these two things don't guarantee this conclusion here, right? So this is invalid. And there's different fallacies that are related to this. So you might say if P, then Q, Q, therefore P. So if somebody argued in this way, if P, then Q, Q, therefore P, this is called affirming the consequent. If premise 1 is true and premise 2 is true, it wouldn't logically be necessitated that premise 3 is true. So I say, okay, James, this is all pretty basic. Okay, so she's presenting an argument, right? So her argument is, so let's start with the conclusion. We know what her conclusion is. Her conclusion is that her conclusion is that an all-loving, all-good being does not exist, right? So we know that's her conclusion. What was her premises? It seems like she doesn't present this as a deductive argument, but it seems like it's something along the lines of there is evil in the world, right? So we'll say premise 1 here. There is suffering in the world. Therefore, an all-loving, all-good being does not exist. Now, you'll notice something here, right? So, and I'm not being uncharitable in phrasing it this way. Let's notice they put the prompt up at the top left here. I don't know if you can see it because I'm in the way. I'll move myself over. In the top, you can see because suffering exists, an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing deity cannot exist, right? So, if we're going to go back to our argument that we're constructing, it seems to look at something like this. There is suffering in the world, and then she concludes, because of that, an all-loving, all-good being does not exist. Wait, what? That doesn't follow. She's missing a premise. There has to be another premise here, right? Because if all we have is one, there's suffering in the world, we can't get to an all-loving, all-good being does not exist, right? Again, she doesn't set it up in this deductive argument, but the way she phrased it, it's because there is suffering in the world, being of this type cannot exist. So she needs to have another premise here. So the hidden premise that she's not saying is something like this too that I've written in here. She's assuming that it is impossible for an all-good, all-powerful being to have a morally sufficient reason to allow suffering to exist, right? Because if it's possible, even if it's just possible, that a all-good, all-powerful being has a morally sufficient reason, the mere presence of suffering in the world, that would not guarantee us the conclusion that this type of being doesn't exist, right? So the reason I'm pointing all this out is at this stage in the argument, right? Like if I'm in this situation, Y'all, I'm salivating. I'm like a shark who smells blood, because I can tell she doesn't know how to set up an argument. She doesn't know how to set up premises. And I know that the version of this argument, so she's going with the problem of evil here. She's going with a logical problem of evil. So it seems like she's trying to insinuate that it is logically impossible for there to be suffering in the world and there be a deity in the world. And this type of problem of evil has massively fallen out of favor in the philosophical literature, with many saying it's either dead or all but dead. And it's because it is pretty much impossible for her to justify this premise that it is impossible for God to have a morally sufficient reason. So all these women have to do in this situation, all they need to do is they need to point out that her argument is a non sequitur. They need to point out, listen, you're saying there's an implicit assumption here. You haven't articulated it. Let's get at that out and going. And then they can just challenge her to support that premise. And again, because we are recognizing this is all a game, right? This is all the philosophy, debate, rhetoric, YouTube, blood sport game where we just argue to get people to watch things, right? So all you have to do here to win, so to speak, is you then shift the burden onto her, because remember, she's the one making an argument. You get to play the skeptic here, and then you just shift the burden onto her and say, you haven't supported your premises, and then you guys would be taking the power dynamic back. If you did this, if one of you did this and you shifted it back on her and said she has to support the premises, now it's on her, and now you all get to be in the driver's seat, so to speak. Let's see how they actually go forward with this.
Hi, I'm Casey.
Hi, I'm Alexis.
I'm Nikia.
Emily. I'm Maya.
Hello. Okay. Because suffering exists, an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing deity cannot exist. So to just break down each component of that, I see four premises and a conclusion. And all-good means, in this case, I think, in my understanding of Christian theology, that is synonymous with all-loving. So we can kind of interchange that if you're comfortable with that, but wanting the best for all and wanting to minimize or erase suffering in the case of God. All powerful, being able to do literally anything, no maximum. All knowing.
I just want to clarify that within the philosophical literature and within Christian theology, God being all-powerful doesn't mean he can actualize any propositions. There's just different ways to articulate this. I have a brief section talking about different views of omnipotence in my dissertation, which I'll put a link to that or a picture of that on screen. It's free on Amazon as an ebook. I would define omnipotence as something like maximal possible set of power-granting abilities or something along those lines. Christians have long recognized that God cannot do things which are logically impossible or immoral. So I just want to kind of add that in there.
Knowing everything that has ever happened, knowing everything that's going to happen, knowing everything at once. Suffering is the conscious experience of pain or something that we don't want to happen. And because those first three, my statement is that those first three do not allow for logically the fourth one to exist.
Okay, there, did you all hear that? Okay, so she is saying it with her chest, right? Like she is saying it's logically incompatible. So y'all, anyone in this room like who has experience like with philosophy, they would just be, smiling. I put me in there, right? Like the problem with this, as I've already talked on, and I'll let them get into it, is she has not justified that assertion that these things are logically incompatible with the existence of God. There's that hidden premise, which is that an all good, all powerful, all whatever, all that stuff, the omnis. I'm just going to say the omnis to make it shorter. Her assumption is that it's impossible for an omni being to have a morally sufficient reason for allowing this. So at this point, what these women should do is they should point out that her argument is a non sequitur. It does not follow from the premises that suffering exists to therefore an all-knowing, an omni-deity doesn't exist. That does not logically follow. And this is the point where it's just clear, like, she's your everyday average atheist who doesn't know what she's talking about.
The suffering.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so because this question deals with morality, from your worldview, where do we get our sense of morality from?
Okay, so this is a mistake because this is often referred to as the problem of evil. However, there are versions of the problem of evil, like the one she just presented. She never said anything about morality or suffering. Now, she did bring into that conceptions of God being all good. Maybe I should be more fair here. Because she said something about God being all good, maybe you could try to press her on this. I don't think that's fair, though, because I think she can just shift away from the all good language and just go with all loving. And she can still She can say maybe under a Christian conception of what love is or something like that, or under our normal understanding of what love is, it doesn't make sense for God to allow this type of suffering or something along those lines. So I understand where this woman is coming from. I think this is a mistake. I think right off the bat, and in a situation like this, I don't think you want to ask these type of open-ended questions unless, because remember, this is a game. This is not a good natured conversation. This is a debate game. In these type of questions, I think you need to ask the questions that you ask that are open-ended like this. Ideally, you're asking these to get them to set a trap for themselves. And I don't get the sense that's probably what she's doing here. Maybe she is. I'll let her finish.
I actually don't think it has anything to do with morality. We can talk about that, but suffering is a conscious experience that can evolutionarily be explained away by not wanting. The opposite of suffering would be wanting to experience the experiences that would lead to the reproduction, essentially. So evolution can explain suffering by saying this, if we're harming each other, if we're not in communion with each other, if we're hurting the youth, right, that causes suffering, but it can be explained by it doesn't further life. I don't think this is specifically a question of morality. So yeah.
So here I think she messed up because she did bring morality into it. So I want to be fair to the woman who I started to critique. So the woman over here on the right, I don't think this isn't the way I would press, but I do feel like there's another way they could press her there and say, wait a second, part of your premises was about God being all good. So you are bringing moral conceptions into this. So if they want to say, hey, listen, you brought your moral conceptions into this, therefore, I can question this. And maybe that's what she's about to do. Let's let her go.
So then wouldn't it be true that the definition of suffering would be able to change based on your personal preference, based on what society deems as either good or bad? Where do we get this law, this standard that's innately in us? That's more so my question.
Sure.
So, okay, so this has changed the debate topic away from what it was. So now we're talking about why do we have moral intuitions? Why do we have conceptions or beliefs about morality? But that's not where they need to press you. What they need to do, because at this point, if I'm an atheist watching, and I'm going to be like, okay, like, she presented an argument, this other stuff that's being asked. Now you're essentially giving her the chance to present more arguments that aren't necessarily related to her original.
I do think that that taps into something really important, because whenever we talk about suffering, it's very, very personal to people. And that's not something that I feel comfortable speaking to for everyone. I'm 99, I'm agnostic, so I don't know anything for certain. I'm 99% certain that people, whatever they consider suffering, they don't enjoy it. But, there's the 1% odd ends here and there who might. Who knows? Okay,
so she dodged the question there, because I think the question was about where does your sense of morality come from? Where do we get this more, standard? And that is a relevant question, even though I feel like they're not pressing her where she needs to be. This is a relevant question because when she says that God is all good, therefore he shouldn't allow suffering, she is assuming and invoking a concept of what an all good being would do. She's invoking concepts of what would be entailed from being all good. So this is relevant. Like the woman who's pressing her, this is relevant, and I do feel like she's dodging the question here. This is not related.
I think you're right that it is very personal and important.
I think your claim presupposes two things. First, I think it presupposes that suffering is objectively wrong, which I don't really understand from the atheistic viewpoint, but I also think it presupposes that the existence of suffering being A and the existence of the attributes of God being B are contradictory, and they're not, because A can exist and B can exist, and they're also not contradictory because a characteristic of God is suffering. He not only explains why we have suffering because of sin in Genesis, but he also explains how to deal with suffering, why there is suffering, and he embodies suffering. When Christ came to earth, he took on the most severe form of suffering that any of us could ever.
Okay, so in the beginning of this, I was thinking, okay, maybe she's going to cook, right? So she starts to talk about the attributes of God and how the atheist, how she has not, shown an incompatibility there, right? So that was good. That's where she should press. But now this area, I don't feel like is relevant for this section. The topic under debate is how can these attributes of God be consistent with this thing we see in the world?
Comprehend. I mean, not only living his life free of sin when sin was all around him. So being involved in his creation day to day, that was a form of internal suffering that he had to deal with, a grieving of his heart. And then you see the suffering of his crucifixion. He was beaten, mocked, beard hair ripped out, but I think we also don't even understand the complexity of that beating, of that crucifixion. He was flogged with a whip that had pieces of glass on the end of it, among other sharp things, and his flesh was ripped open, nervous system exposed. I mean, medical examiners have...
All of this is irrelevant. I'm going to be fair to both parties, right? Which is what you come here for, me being pedantic to everyone. None of this is relevant. So like whether or not God, whether or not Christ suffered, or whether or not God suffered through Christ, all of this is, interesting for other reasons. But, and I think maybe it's tangentially related in some areas, but the central argument she's advancing is an incompatibility between the existence of suffering and a certain type of being. And this is, in my opinion, this is not the way to press. This is not too relevant for this. I think she should have stuck on what she said originally about the incompatibility of the properties and suffering. That would have been better off.
Done extensive research on this, on the crucifixion, what it would have caused. Flesh, out, nervous system out, bones exposed, bones broken, carrying a 300-pound cross over a mile up to where he was crucified. And then the nails, not small nails, but nails probably railroad size, into his hands and his feet. And he did that out of love. So I think that if you look to the Bible and you look to God, I don't think that suffering is something that he deems as contradictory to himself in his existence.
Okay, a few things here. So at the beginning, I gave a very brief synopsis of what I was working with as far as all good / all loving, which is to erase as much suffering as possible. And you do have to put all three of the characteristics of God according to the Christian definition of God, which is all good, all powerful, all knowing. So not just able to, but wants to. That does contradict with suffering existing. The other thing about Jesus...
Okay, so let's talk there about suffering. So she would have to show that God being all good, all that, the omnis, right? She would need to show that a being who is like that would want to bring... So I think most of us are going to assume that in a general sense, in the eschaton, God wants to do away with suffering, right? But what she's going to have to show is she's going to have to show that even if God wants ultimately that to be the case, she's going to need to show that it's logically impossible for God to have a morally sufficient reason for allowing any type of suffering. So something that might be relevant. So in these type of conversations and the problem of suffering, there are what's known as theodicies, or kind of explanations for why God might allow suffering. And there's a whole literature on this, right? And I've even written about this topic a little bit in some of my work. So someone might say, listen, the reason that God allows suffering is because of soul building. Like this process we go through and experiencing, suffering, it is in some way beneficial to the development of our souls. People might draw on free will. I'm giving just very quick sketches here. People might draw on free will and say, listen, God wants there to not be suffering in the world, but he wants there to not be suffering in a world in which all the creatures are free and, so on and so forth. And so there's kind of this premise here about an all good, all loving God would eliminate suffering immediately or by any means necessary or something along those lines. But that's the question, or that's the premise that someone like me is going to question. So I kind of give this thought experiment in my work. In my book, The Devil's Disbarment. Imagine you have God, right? So it seems to me plausible, and I'm going to give the summary argument. I go into a bit more depth in the book. It seems to me plausible that if God creates, God would want to share creation and governance of his world with his creatures. God doesn't want to just be like a musician who sits on stage and he plays and we listen. He wants to invite us into contributing our own beats and melodies to the song, so to speak. And if God does this, God wants us to have real significant, responsibility in his creation. God can't, and he wants us all to be free. God can't just step in anytime he wants and at any point where he sees us doing something that he thinks isn't the best and override us. Because if he did that, then it would quickly become apparent that, he didn't really give us responsibility. He didn't really give us, any choice or anything along those lines. And if he did that, and we're in the audience, so to speak, and, we'll recognize, okay, God says he's going to give me this authority. He says he wants me to partake in him, but really he's not letting me add my beats and melodies. He's only letting me add the beats and melodies he's already predetermined that I'm allowed allowed. This seems more like an insult to me. This seems like, okay, like you extended your hand and saying you wanted me to play with you, but now you're setting these terms in this really precise way. So it may be, the reason I say all this is, it may be that God, in giving us responsibility and giving us stuff like that, God has to, in a sense, let us make decisions that aren't the best, that maybe bring about harm or things along those lines. And that doesn't mean he just steps back and does nothing. It may be that he tries to teach us. So he may try to come along us, and even if he knows that the decision we're making is a bad one, he may go ahead and allow that decision to be made, because in doing so, he is allowing us to have that responsibility. He's allowing us to grow, and he's allowing us to see that, his wisdom is a good one, right? So I'll give you a little bit of a thought experiment. When I was young, my mom wouldn't let us buy sugary cereal because obvious reasons. And then I think one time we were allowed to have like sugary cereal, and I ate a bunch and I got like a tummy ache, right? As is tradition. And afterwards I was like, oh mom, I get why you don't let us have that now, right? So in that scenario, her allowing me to have that suffering, it communicated something about like, oh, like mom knows what she's talking about. Like this isn't just, like, okay, there's a reason for this. Like, and if you think that part of what is going on in this kind of, world and whatnot is an environment where God is creating free creatures. He's giving them responsibility, but he's trying to teach and grow them to be the type of person that will freely choose to do good and be virtuous and, kind of a mature, being. Then it isn't obvious that God, being all good, all knowing and all that, it's not going to entail that he just immediately wipes out any evil. He immediately wipes out any suffering, or he immediately wipes out, beings who cause suffering or anything like that. And so all that's just like one area you could take this. There's other areas about soul building, free will, stuff like this. This is a very huge debated area in the literature. But just to highlight, there's different lines you could go down here to press on this assumption that if God's all good and all loving, and if he wants to do away with, suffering, which I think God does want to do away with suffering, there's a premise there, which is that he's just going to exert his power and get rid of suffering no matter what the other consequences are. And that's a premise in this argument that could be questioned.
This crucifixion, whether or not that happened isn't really part of the prompt. I will say that this is a case of, I'm not going to be the one to compare the suffering of anyone to the people who are suffering right here, right now, who are more innocent than an adult man, who are children going through extremely excruciating circumstances. The kind of comparison of suffering I am going to push back on for the sake of people in this world right now who are going through real suffering.
Yeah, so if I'm her, this is not the argument I run. One, because the more innocent than a grown man, you say that in a room of Christians, you're going to get them probably derailing, talking to you about how Jesus is innocent. I haven't seen what comes after this. We'll see if I predict that right. But if I was her in this situation, I'm going to say, hey, listen, like that's all that. Okay, like I can affirm the man Jesus suffered. But the thing if I'm her, what I'm going to say is like, hey, listen, the thing that we're trying to debate here, the point I'm pressing is that if a being of this type existed, I would not expect to see suffering in the world. And so just pointing and saying, oh, but God did suffer, that's going to be in some sense question begging, because the very thing I'm questioning is whether or not a God of this type would allow these type of things. So that's what I would do. I don't feel like her response was a very strong one there. I think both parties need to do a better job at focusing on the original argument. Her original argument was very poor, and she mentioned 4 premises, but she never spells out what the premises and conclusion are. So I don't even know if she could do that if pressed on it. But anyways, we'll see. I'm going to predict. I haven't seen this yet. I'm going to predict someone goes into something about Jesus being innocent.
I think that's a good point, but I would argue that children are not more innocent than Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is
I would disagree with
sinless.
that.
I called
Strongly.
it.
Well,
I
we're all
called it.
sinners.
I promise you guys I didn't watch this before. I promise you I didn't watch that section beforehand. Okay, oh man, I'm just that good, y'all. This is why you come to In Philosopher's Garb. It's just that type of predictive power.
You
Children
don't have to teach a child how to do wrong. You have to teach a child to do what is right from the get-go. Don't hit, don't lie, because it's innately in them.
I don't think that means that they're deserving of suffering. And I
Well,
also
I'm not
don't
talking
think,
about deserving.
Again, I will not back down on children being more innocent than any adult, period.
I love these points that you're making. I think this is such a big deal because many people feel this way, Christians and non-Christians. And I think there's 2 things really happening here. We're talking about suffering in general. I love the point that she made, and that it is a part of the human experience, a part of what we find in the scriptures. And there's actually an encouragement of valuing that suffering. And as opposed to, it's not good, I'm suffering, I must be far from God. It's actually the opposite, where we are to value suffering so that it can produce things like character, hope,
Okay, there we go.
perseverance.
Okay, so it seems like she's starting to. Okay, so I was a little bit concerned in the beginning. It seems like she's starting to maybe go into like a soul building theodicy. Yeah, so okay, maybe we're going to start getting somewhat good here.
So there's that one side. I think that the Bible shows that it's valuable to value suffering. I think the other side is the repercussions of free will. I think God, being all loving, all good, he created his children, and he gives us that free will to decide. So yes, and because he's not going to control us all and make us machines, he is going to allow us to build our life. And fortunately and unfortunately, you have the bad and the good that comes with it. So it does show him as a good and loving. And if he says he gives us free will, he's going to follow through with that. And I think that also shows his love for his people, that he trusts us for the better and the worse of that. And yes, there's so much suffering and there's so much injustice. I don't believe that it's God, that it's proof that God doesn't exist. I believe that it's proof that God is all loving, and he is allowing leadership within his people. And so we're seeing that play out. I would say it's more dangerous to not have the God of the Bible, because
So I will say this also. This is just me. If I'm in a situation like this, I'm going to want to. It's not. Obviously, I'm a Christian, but you can, if they're making an argument about a generic deistic, a generic God, in your defense, you can keep that defense into just a defense of a general, generic God. So you don't have to get into the specifics of the biblical God. And you say, James, well, why not? I'm a Christian. Because this is the game. Remember, this is a game. This is a debate rhetoric game. Any proposition you put forward is something you have to defend. Any piece you put on the table, that is something that can be attacked. And because in this situation, the thing that's trying to be attacked is the just incompatibility, supposedly, of a being that has these omni properties, and that existence of that type of being and suffering in the world, the compatibility of that. You don't need to put a bunch of other pieces on the board for her to straw man and for her to red herring after. Because if in her shoes, you may present something, you may say something that she red herrings after, and then you guys go off trail a little bit, and then her original argument never gets defeated. And even if she is wrong about the thing you guys go on a red herring on, the thing that you want to do is that original point that she brought up. That's what you want to focus in on. You want to bring it all back to the argument. Now, I do think this woman does a good job at getting at some of the ideas and concepts that people are going to want to appeal to explain why it is that God might not immediately just, remove suffering, which is this idea that I was, kind of talking about before of God wants us to have freedom of will to choose him or not. He wants us to have, significance and responsibility in our actions. A world where we have significance and weight to our actions is one I think is intuitively more valuable than one world where I don't have any weight or have anything I get to contribute. I'm just this passive observer in the world. And then with that, kind of what I was talking about, if God gives us responsibility, he gives us free will, part of that is going to be recognizing that, he can't just step in every time he sees us doing something wrong. So I'll give you a thought experiment that I use in my book. So imagine you have a father who's the CEO of a big business, or we'll say a moderate sized business, right? And he wants the son to be part of the family business. He wants the son to, come and rule it with him, and rule is a weird way, govern the business, right? Govern the business with him. And so the dad says to the son, "Hey, I'm gonna bring you in. We're gonna give you a seat. You're gonna have authority and control over this section of maybe our production or whatever. And we're gonna give you $20,000 to invest how you see fit in a way to bring up our." Bring up our product line, help our profits and whatnot. So the son comes in and he says, okay, cool. I'm going to spend the $20,000 on revamping our machines. I've seen that the machines, they're kind of clunky. They look bad. I think we can get them more efficient. So he pitches this to dad. He says, hey, this is what I want to do. The dad says, no, you're not going to do that. No, it's not going to happen. And so the son says, oh, okay. And so he goes back to the drawing board and he says, okay, here's what I want to do, Dad. I want to use the $20,000 to expand into this other market that we haven't got into yet. There's something similar, like a similar product line, and I think we could expand into that. And the dad says, nope, that's not going to work either. I'm not going to let you do that. So the son's like, all right, I don't know. I've noticed the chairs in our corporate office are pretty uncomfortable and people aren't liking them. How about we buy everybody new navy blue office chairs? And the dad thinks for a second and he says, okay, but only if they're black and not navy blue. In that scenario, is that son, like, was he really given like responsibility? Was he really given, you know, the kind of outstretched offer of responsibility that the father was wanting to convey? Is the son going to walk away from that feeling like he was actually given that responsibility? No. What began as a gift, as a compliment of like, my son, I want you to govern and share in this with me, it's now going to become an insult to the son. It's like, oh, it was all a sham. It was a scam. He's just going to do what he wants to do. I'm just a figurehead here, right? So, and that could be a source of souring in the relationship. So what's the dad going to do here, right? Now, the dad may be 100% right. The dad may know moving into this product line is a bad idea. The dad may know changing up the machinery is not a bad idea. But if the dad just vetoes it and he doesn't let the son do it, that can still have the negative consequences to the relationship. So what might the dad do? The dad might offer his advice to the son and he might suggest things. But in order to get the son where he ultimately wants him to be, and for the relationship to get where he ultimately wants it, he may let the son make bad decisions that affect the company. He may let these negative things manifest to show the son to not rob the son of the responsibility, to show the son that he meant it, but also to show that, oh yeah, like dad knows what he's talking about, and if I make a suggestion and dad offers me input, yeah, I should probably really listen to that. So that's just kind of a thought experiment about how, like, if God is kind of the dad in the situation who's wanting mankind to kind of co-rule creation with him, there's a fine line that he has to walk, just like there's a fine line that the dad has to walk of where do I step in and exert my control and say, no, you're just not going to do this whatsoever. And when does God allow us to make bad decisions that have suffering consequences in knowing he doesn't want that, so that in this process, we may learn and come to be the type of beings he wants to be. I give more developed lines of thought about that in my book, The Devil's Disbarment, and one of the chapters that is the book is about atonement. It's not about this, but it's all kind of related. So I think she's getting on the right track here. So I'll give thumbs up to her.
You know, if someone says, I actually believe that it's good to harm children, and that's their belief, and they have no basis or they have no foundation, I think that's where it can get really murky. But I think it's two separate things, and I think there is a value to suffering, so that I believe that, and what I see in the scriptures is it leads us to God. It leads us to look up. It leads us to go, why is this happening? And I think instead of trying to prove that they're more than likely he doesn't exist, I think instead it should hopefully make us to want to experience this true God that is all loving, that is all good. I think that's where the direction should actually go. So.
Yeah, so you brought up a lot of interesting points. Free will is really interesting, so we can get back to that. Yeah. But the value of suffering is tricky. I think we need to be really careful when we make assertions that there should be value in suffering. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's appropriate to tell people who are suffering. Sure. Viktor Frankl comes to mind, who was a survivor of the Holocaust. He wrote an entire book and developed logotherapy, which is the process of finding meaning in suffering. There is that possibility. I do think that can be really powerful, because you're right that suffering exists. And I think it can be really transformative and important whenever we all go through that journey of how can I take this harm, this suffering, and transmute it into something better for the collective. I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of the human experience. I'm literally getting chills right now. The concern I have is that the message of saying you should value your suffering, not by you, certainly not by you, has been manipulated so intensely to keep people complacent, compliant, and controlled. So I just wanted to bring that up for anyone watching who is going through suffering. There could be a light at the end of the tunnel. That does not, I don't find it appropriate to say that, but your suffering is good. It can be if they want it to be. So I'm
going to pause her there. I think there's a point that she makes there, which is we can say that God allows suffering for a good reason without saying that suffering itself is intrinsically good. Because as Christians, we all think we're going to get to the place eventually where there's no more suffering. All the tears are going to be, wiped away and all that good stuff. So it's not that we're saying that suffering is intrinsically valuable It's more so that one might say suffering is instrumentally valuable. So it's valuable as an instrument to do this type of soul building, or like something I might want to say is it is the kind of byproduct, or it is an entailment from these other good things that God gives us, such as moral responsibility, significance in our actions, free will, so on and stuff like that. So there's several things. I don't think we just want to say it's outright an intrinsic good and intrinsic value. We could say it's instrumental in certain situations, and so this is why God allows it for soul building, kind of what she was getting at. And I don't know that the woman was originally saying that it was intrinsically good. Maybe she was. Maybe it did, in memory, it did seem to maybe flirt that line a little bit. But maybe that was just an area they could clarify. Yeah, so definitely don't want to say it's intrinsically valuable, but I suspect she's probably going to press, the atheist is probably going to press the point that I would press if I was in her shoes.
Back to, you were kind of talking about whether or not I think a deity exists. I don't think that's really part of what I was saying with the prompt. I was saying that maybe it's better to say if a creator being exists. We already talked about all of that earlier, but if one exists, all good, all powerful, and all knowing does not make sense with so much suffering. I think we're kind of brushing over the all-powerful part because
Okay, so I think we're getting back to the prompt here. So this is good, because like what I would do if I was in her shoes, I'd basically say, hey, listen, the stuff about suffering, being something we can make meaning out of, that's great and all, but the very question is, would we expect to have suffering in a world that had this type of being? So I think this is good on her part. I think she's starting to go back in the right direction and rein it in. And it's something about part of these dialogues is like she can't just interrupt and be like, nope, that's not it, get back on topic. You know what I mean? So she's kind of got to let him speak. So I think it looks like she's tastefully kind of going back in the direction that I would, if I was in her shoes, I would say she should press and she should argue. So I suspect, okay, she says something about being all powerful. I'm gonna make a prediction again. I'm gonna make a prediction that she's gonna butcher omnipotence here. This is my prediction. She's gonna say God, because he's omnipotent, should be able to do something that omnipotence doesn't entail. Let's see if I get this one right.
I think there are ways, if free will exists, for it's almost like inappropriate to suggest that an all-powerful being couldn't possibly design a life and a universe where the suffering is without the scale of suffering that we see. I mean, some of this stuff, it's just asinine and unnecessary. There's no reason for animals to suffer. There's no reason for children to suffer. They're not learning from their mistakes. They're children. Animals.
So it seems like she's starting to get into the problem of, is there unnecessary suffering and whatnot. But the question that I'm going to have, well, I'll let her finish this and then we'll look.
Aren't learning from their mistakes, even from my understanding of the Christian worldview, animals don't have souls. So where's the redemption there? And I understand the fallen world argument, but going back to the prompt, I still don't think that those three characteristics of a deity make sense with the scope and scale of suffering that we see.
Okay, so there's several things to unpack here. So just on the stuff about animal suffering, so there actually have been some philosophers who have argued and made a case for some type of theodicy related to them about there being like animal soul building or things along those lines. So now when we talk about the scale of suffering, so there's a couple of things here. So one, we need to recognize it may be the case that God could create a world that has less suffering, but it's not just about can God create a world that has less suffering. It's about can God create a world that has less suffering while maintaining the same amount of good. Because it may be that because of how free will and human choices play out, hypothetically, it may be that a world that has this much good in it, it may be that this type of world is one which you can't have this much good and have like a fourth as much, suffering or something along those lines. So it's not just about the ratio or quantity of suffering. It's about the ratio between suffering and goods in the world. So for instance, if God made a world where there's only 10 people, and maybe God never let there be more than 10 people on the planet at any time, that's a world where, okay, like there's going to be less suffering pretty much constantly, like, however this, plays out. But a world with only 10 people and it has way less good. Like there are goods of like large groups of people and societies like doing things together and constructing a society together. And then there's also less pleasure and less value. There's less sons and daughter that God gets to have in his family and so on and so forth. So I think it's not, you have to look at the ratio between these things. So I'm interested to see. And then also one final thing I have a thought about on this on this scale thing, it seems like no matter how much evil is in the world, you could represent this question and say, well, listen, surely it doesn't have to be this much. So let's say the amount of evil that we have in the world right now is like, let's put a number on it and say it's a 10. Let's say God's like, you know what? This woman's right. I got to scale this back. I've been letting things get out of control. And then he says, okay, I'm going to cut it in half. She could still be like, the scale of the evil, there's so much. Like, why is there this much? Couldn't there be less? And then God could be like, you're right. I'm going to half it again. Like, you could always just keep halving and halving the evil. So what this does eventually come down to is you're either going to have to say God is, morally obligated, or, God can't allow any type of suffering. And I'm using evil and suffering interchangeably here. You're going to have to say that God can't allow any, and she doesn't seem like she now is wanting to argue that. She's wanting to go with the scale argument at this point. But the second you recognize that there's at least some that's allowed, well, then you're going to have, I think, trouble and problems of arguing why this amount that we have is over like the allowed limit or something along those lines. I hope that made sense. So I'll go ahead and let them respond.
Thank you so much for choosing this prompt. I relate to it very personally. Growing up in a very dysfunctional home, being a Black woman, and being a healthcare provider, I see suffering throughout my life. I do not it seems like there is a gap between suffering and saying that these characteristics can't be true for God. And I say that because when God created Earth, when he created the universe, he created it good. Everything was going according to his plan, and he did give us free will. He is a just God and all powerful.
Okay, so like she is also pointing out like, hey, there's this disconnect there. But what I want to see as your friendly neighborhood theology coach is just don't bring this Bible stuff into it right now. Because first off, that's in a sense you're assuming aspects of a framework that she rejects. So if you say, but like, because of this thing in the Bible, she's gonna say, well, listen, that's assuming that that's true. But the very thing that is under debate here is whether or not this type of being would allow this type of situation. What I would really want to see them all press on is, instead of going to this Bible stuff or doing this other stuff, I really want you guys, or you gals, to focus in on making explicit how her argument is a non sequitur. Like if I was in this situation, I would say, okay, you mentioned premises. This is maybe what I would be tempted to do. You said premises. Can you set up those premises in a deductive argument for me? And then when she sets up those premises in a deductive argument, then point out how there's a hidden premise or something's a non sequitur or something like that.
For God, all loving God. However, because of our free will, we did make a choice. Adam and Eve did. And that not only affected humans, but creation in and of itself. So there we invited dysfunction in that way. And then suffering is very, very personal, like you said. I just do not want to understate that. And we have books like Job where he's suffering because Satan wanted to prove a point that the only reason why Job loved God was because good things were happening to him. And we see that Job still loved God even when he was suffering so much. He lost everything. And it's not an award for him to get double what he got back. But I think we need to realize the point where God actually, he didn't answer his question directly about why he was suffering. He actually start telling him about the universe. He's like, I can see everything. You're not going to understand everything. That does not mean suffering is good, but I see everything and that I know I can restore everything. And despite what you're going through, I know that you're not suffering because you're a bad person. He even rebuked Job's friends for saying it was as a consequence of something he did. Sometimes suffering happens because there's dysfunction entered into the world because of sin. It's not always a cause and effect. Like you did something wrong, now you're going to suffer. And then we have books like Ecclesiastes that specifically say, it is not fair. I've done everything right and I'm still suffering. There's people out there doing things that are bad and they get good things. So why does this make sense? Again, it's because there's dysfunction in this world and we still have people making choices out there. So this started in the beginning and it isn't going to be perfect all the way through. And that does not say that God isn't good. God isn't all powerful. It means he's just, things will work out. Not all the time, not the way we think it, but there is dysfunction that we cannot control. And although he's all powerful, he's not going to take away our free will, and he's going to let things play out the way they are. And there's going to be consequences, good or bad, for our choices personally and for others. And it reflects not only in our time, but throughout time. And then we have Psalms where we have David and other people just crying out to God. So
those laments, it's saying that God doesn't ignore suffering. He's not saying necessarily that it's good. He acknowledges it, he honors us, and that he lets us know that he's present. And my whole point of all of this is that his characteristics are real despite there being bad things in this world. And I feel like there is a missing piece as to, first of all, why we think suffering is bad. There has to be morality behind that. It's some objective truth that we think it's bad. Otherwise, why are we even talking about it if suffering is something that's just not physiological, just not?
So I do think, okay, so there are several things you could go with here. So it seems like she almost wants to go into an argument about, hey, listen, we don't know why God allows suffering. It seems like I was getting hints of this, of like why we don't know why God allows suffering, but that doesn't mean like we shouldn't think he's there. This seems to be kind of flirting with a line of thought that's referred to as skeptical theism. And so the general idea is you could respond to a problem evil by saying something like this: hey, listen, I don't know why God allows suffering. But given my epistemic limitations, it isn't surprising to me that I don't see why God allows suffering. And so you might have this analogy of like, if I told you that there was an elephant in my tent, if we were out camping and I said, there's like an elephant in my tent or a fox in my tent or something like that, you could go stick your head in and you could check and see like, okay, there's no elephant in your tent, there's no fox in your tent. But if I said, there's like a no-see-um in my tent, where a no-see-um is like a small little bug you can't quite see with your eye, well, if you just put your head in, you're not going to be able to see a no-see-um. So like if the fact that you didn't see them is not evidence that it's not there. So there are those in theology who would say, hey, listen, we may not be aware of why God allows suffering or why God allows suffering to this scale, but that's because of an epistemic limitation on our part, and that doesn't justify, saying that God doesn't exist because of it. And then that's one of those areas where you could push the argument back on her. So what we have going on in this conversation at this point is the atheist makes some statements, and then the women she's talking with make some statements, and they're statements back and forth. What I want to see is her making a statement, and then what I want to see is them asking questions or pushing things back on her, not just making counter statements. So I want to say, hey, put this in a syllogism. Okay, that premise right there, I want to hear you justify that premise. I want to hear you say why God can't, I want to have more of them narrowing down and pressuring on these pressure points of where there are assumptions in her argument. And again, I want to point out, all these women need to do is they just need to pressure. They just need to play the skeptic, so to speak. They just need to put pressure on the fact that the atheist hasn't really argued their case much. They made some assertions, they made some non sequiturs, and they have some premises. But all they need to do is play the skeptic and push back and make her on the spot justify her claims. And I don't think this woman would probably be able to do that. I mean, I don't think she's probably that well read in the literature. If she had, I don't think she would have come out swinging with the logical problem of evil. So yeah, I guess we'll keep going.
Not neurological, as in us experiencing pain. It's there for a reason, and that's why I find Christianity so compelling, is that it explains why it's here. It gives us hope to stop it for ourselves and for others around us, and that there's redemption coming in the future. Thank you.
I think to that, I would say a few things here. If the trade-off, according to this argument, for free will, which is the only reason I've heard that God has this all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good creator being, not just allows, but because is all-powerful, brought into existence our suffering, doesn't just allow, brought into existence the entire...
That doesn't logically follow. So so that's just a non sequitur, and they could push her on that as well. So if God creates a world with free creatures, and he has by default no suffering, and he allows those creatures to do something that brings about suffering, that wouldn't mean that God himself is the one who brought it about. So that's just a non sequitur on her part.
Entirety of this universe, which includes suffering, and perpetuates it continuously, I would like to just go on record and say, you can have my free will. I do not consider that to be a sufficient trade-off. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I'm just saying, if that were the case, you can have my free will. I would rather be a robot than watch the atrocities that are happening. That's a personal take. Again, we're all kind of bringing our personal takes into this. And then I still don't see...
Okay, so I want to pause here to address that. But then you're asking for less love. You're asking for God to care about you less and to value you less. And if God is perfectly loving and perfectly good, he's not going to value you less. He's not going to love you less. And you say, what do you mean this would be asking her to asking him to love her less? So C.S. Lewis talks about this in his book, The Problem of Pain. And he has this thought experiment that I quite like, and I'm just going to give a nutshell version of it. So C.S. Lewis's thought experiment goes kind of like this. He says, over a drawing made idly to amuse a child, an artist might not care too much over. So if you have an artist and he's just making a kind of a quick sketch to give to a child to, keep them busy or entertain them or something, he's not going to put maybe a whole lot of work into that. He's going to give it, yeah, okay, good enough, and go, right? But over their life's work, like over the big piece that they see as, like defining them and all that, what they want to be remembered by, an artist is going to give way, way more work. He's going to take way more details, and he may scrape and erase and redraw lines and do all this stuff and rework sections and draw it out again and say, no, and rework sections and scrape and erase and all that and take a knife to it. And if we were to imagine that painting was conscious, if we were to imagine that it would, a sentient being, it might not be too fond of all that. After the fourth time that a section was scraped or vigorously like rubbed off to be, drawn something in or added here or there, it may not like that. It may be quite uncomfortable. It may be wishing, oh, just be done with it already. That's good enough. It may be wishing that it was more like the sketching made idly to amuse the child. But if it was to wish that, it would be wishing for less love. It would be wishing for less intention. And so you may say, hey, James, I'm content to just be, to just take my free will away, make me a robot. That's content with what I want. But God's not content to keep you at just that level. God's not. So C.S. Lewis draws on a thought experiment that I believe he says comes from George MacDonald, where when we become Christians, it's like we have, it's like we're a house, like we're this old creaky house where like the plumbing is leaking and like the floor is rotting out and stuff like that. And it's like we're inviting God in to spruce up the place. And at first he starts doing things that we would expect him to do. Like, yeah, okay, he fixes the leaky faucet, he patches up the back door where there's a giant hole in it, he, replaces the floorboards, stuff like that. He does the stuff that we would expect. But then he does a bunch of stuff that, like, wait, we weren't signing up for that. Like, he's taken down a wall. Like, he's adding a whole new wing. He's vaulting the ceilings. He's doing all this stuff. We were content just to be a homey little cottage in the woods, but God's not content with that. He's not content to keep us there. He wants a palace, a mansion fit for him to live in. And so here's the thing. You saying, I want less love, I want to just be a robot, that is like a child saying that, well, I don't want to go to Disney World. I'm just content to play with mud pies in the backyard. Like, you're a child. You don't know what you're saying. It's like a child saying, well, I don't want my fruits and vegetables. I just want to eat candy for dinner. Like, it is out of ignorance that you say that. I'm not saying that to be mean. It is out of ignorance that you're saying that. You are not at a point of spiritual maturity for you to be making those calls. And so just like, a good parent doesn't let their 5-year-old child dictate, the decisions, all the decisions they make, because the child doesn't know what's good for them. The child doesn't know what's awaiting them, and so on and so forth. So God, he may hear you say that and say, well, you're immature, you don't know, but I'm here to teach you. C.S. Lewis, he draws on the idea of a child who's first learning his Greek, letters and whatnot. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like it. He doesn't want to do it because he doesn't know the joy and the pleasure he's going to get from reading the great Greek poets in their original language. And so the tutor in the beginning, he just has to force the kid to do the drudgery and to, partake of that, so that later, once he becomes mature, he can then experience those great things. So this argument, it's only successful, or it only sounds plausible if you don't take seriously what it is God's trying to make you into, what it is that you want God to be. So this is an area I'd be like, well, actually, if God's all good and all powerful, he's not going to let you make that call for yourself any more than he's going to let, a child decide that, any more than a father would let their child decide, actually, I don't want to have veggies for dinner. I just want to eat pixie sticks. Or, actually, I don't want to go to Disney World with the rest of the family. I just want to sit in the corner and make mud pies, or, something like that. So anyways, yeah.
If we're going back to the all-powerful and all-knowing aspect, how that is yet a justification if you're saying there's absolutely no way two things. If you're saying that absolutely no way that an all-powerful deity could allow for free will, create us with free will to choose him, or to have like a smaller scope of suffering, right? A smaller way of understanding redemption than all of this destruction, what you call dysfunction, which is, I mean, the vast majority of the universe, the vast majority of life as we know it is suffering. And so I don't know if the scale is really balanced there but don't worry, there will be redemption. I don't see that. Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, so let's talk about what she's missing. So again, this goes back to the ratio stuff that I talked about earlier. So let's say God could create a world in which nobody ever suffered. Let's say that world is 100 people. Actually, before we get into that, it's important to note, just because God's all powerful, it doesn't mean he can make you freely do something. That's a logical contradiction. Omnipotence doesn't claim to be able to do logical contradictions. So setting that aside, let's say that there's a world, and also she's making assumptions about what God knows. I'm an open theist, so I don't think that God knows what a person would do under every situation he could put them in. I have a video on my channel that I made not too long ago talking about that, the biblical data for that, and then also some of the philosophical data for that. But let's just go with it, right? Like, let's just grant that for the sake of argument. So a problem that she's noting here is, let's say that God could create a world that has no suffering whatsoever. And let's say that world is 100 people. Or let's say it's like 10 people. Let's make it an even starker contrast. So God could create a world, he has 10 people, no one suffers. So that's world 1. Now let's say there's world 2, in which there are, I don't know, like 10 billion people. And a lot of them suffer greatly. But that suffering is finite. So now it's only a finite amount of suffering. The suffering is eventually defeated. And in this world 2, everybody in that world, now that entire world has significantly more goods. It has significantly more values. It has more people who are part of God's family and contributing things, and us getting to enjoy in community. God gets to have a bigger, greater family that we can all enjoy, right? Let's say the total joy, happiness, and value and good in world 2 is higher than world 1. It would be insane to say that God shouldn't create world 2 just because of this finite amount of suffering that it's going to have. Like, why should that finite amount of suffering that clearly does not offset the infinite, eternal goods of world 2, which comes about because of the more people and so on and so forth. So this is her not being good at math. This is simply that if suffering is finite, if all suffering is defeated, and the ratios work out to be the way that, a world that has this much good can't have, significantly less suffering, then it would make sense. The most rational option for God to take would be a world in which the value is maxed out, so to speak, or significantly high. That's preferable to a world that has way less values and goods, but doesn't have any suffering. So this is just she's not doing the monster math.
Then the on the other side, I don't know if you kind of alluded to it or someone did, but us not understanding the plan doesn't really mean that there is one. So that's kind of what I would say to that.
Yeah, but she doesn't have to show that there is a plan. So this is where they should have come back, and we'll see if they do. I don't think they will. This is where they should have come back and said, well, listen, I don't have to show you that there is a plan. I don't have to show you that God does have a morally sufficient reason. This is your argument. You said God's existence is incompatible with suffering. So you have the burden of proof to show that God can't have a plan. Because so long as it's possible God can have a plan, this isn't a successful argument on her part. And this is why, one of the reasons why logical problems of evil have really fallen out of popularity, and arguments from evil, they've shifted to probabilistic arguments and things along those lines, or evidential problems of evil and whatnot.
I would like to say that I don't think God having all of the power to destroy suffering negates that. I think that it shows his patience, because if he were to perform perfect justice for all of the people that perpetuate that suffering, who commit child abuse, murder, all of that, his wrath would come quickly, and I think that people would be very much regretful of wishing that perfect justice would come. And I think that with God knowing everything, him being all-knowing doesn't mean causality. I could, know that something is going to happen in the next 24 hours. That doesn't make me the perpetuator of that. God is not the author of sin. So anything that occurs because of sin, he is not to be.
So again, so I agree with her that if God knew that people were going to sin, that wouldn't mean he's the author of sin. But here's how you could play this game better, right? Because this is a game. How you can play this better is you could say, hey, listen, you're assuming that if God knows X and God does something that brings about X, or X comes about, you're saying that God caused X, or God is the author of X. That is a premise, that is a conclusion you have not justified. So I want to see you argue for why, if God creates a world, knowing people will freely choose to do something, why it is appropriate to conclude that therefore God caused it. That's an assertion you made. I want to see you justify that assertion. Like, I want to see you guys in this you gals in this situation. I want to see you throw the burden of proof back on her, not just say, hey, I think this premise is wrong. Challenge her to justify the premises that she's putting forward, right? Because then it's a whole lot harder for her to do that and justify those premises, especially since I think she would be doing it on the fly. I don't think she's thought through these things before. And then it's going to be a whole lot easier on you guys, and then you guys just get to play the skeptic.
Be blamed for that. I think that we can definitely question, even as Christians, God, why would you allow this? You know what I mean? But it does go back to redemption. It does go back to Jesus Christ, because he wishes that none should perish, but all should come to repentance. And he is giving mankind time to repent, and he's extending that grace, and he will perform perfect justice against those things that cause suffering or people.
So with you saying redemption and the cross, I want to get to that, because this is the basis of suffering. We have to grasp there. I guess my question for you, before I even get into this, what is the hope behind suffering? What is the reason for suffering from your worldview?
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I'm not trying to be mean. It just doesn't matter for this. Like, she doesn't have to be able to say that there's a reason or account for that reason or anything like that.
Think it's appropriate for me to say why anyone else's suffering has meaning. That's not the stance I'm taking. I can find my own meaning in my own suffering, and I do think it is possible for people to create and find and share their meaning in their own suffering, but I'm not going to make a blanket statement like that. I don't think it's appropriate.
Christianity has the answer to why we suffer, and it is because anything evil that goes against God's holy nature, that is what evil is. Anything that goes against God's holy nature, because he is holy, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, anything that goes against him is horrific. It's what we see here on earth. It is blatant evil. But because we made that choice, humanity made that choice to go against God's nature and God's character, this is the repercussion of that. But what Christianity does is it gives us a hope. I asked you what your hope is. You have your own personal hope. Jesus offers a hope for everybody who would believe that if you would just confess with your mouth and believe with your heart that he is Lord.
Her face there, she's like, listen, I didn't come here for a sermon. I don't think that. I mean, listen, there are elements of this that could potentially be like interesting discussion points of like, okay, listen, like under her worldview, maybe you actually, the suffering that goes about, there's no meaning in it, or it can't be redeemed, so to speak, whereas maybe it can in Christianity. Those are interesting discussion points, but like that would be a discussion point to bring up in a conversation. Like, and you say, James, this isn't a conversation. No, this is a game show. This is a game show. So in the game show, you got to play the objective. All the stuff that she's saying right now, in my opinion, this is not the way to play the game. Like, you need to just continually show her that she has not justified the premises of her argument. And so, yeah, so I feel like this is a tangent. And all this stuff about, well, like, hey, listen, under Christianity, like, suffering is redeemed, all that. What she probably could do, if I was in her shoes and I was wanting to make the argument for her, is question whether or not this type of being would bring about a world that this kind of song and dance, so to speak, even happens. So the thing that she's describing, the way, the system that she set up, if I was the atheist here, I'm just saying, okay, but what is, if a being like this existed, why would a being, set up a system in this way? And probably and maybe she will say this. I don't think we have maybe like a little bit left on this prompt. But I just find this face she's making. I mean, I get it. Like, if I was in her shoes and someone was preaching at me, I'd probably be like, okay, this is not the point.
You would not just on this earth have a Band-Aid on suffering, but that to come, there would be an earth. You think that there should be an earth with no crying, no mourning, no tears? That is to come. That is the promise of Christianity, that there will be a time when there is no more mourning. He will wipe every tear from our eye. There is no more pain that we feel. But it boggles me. You know that there's something in you that says this is wrong, that this is right. Where does that come from? Who gave you that? Do you think because we're cells and we're atoms that it's just here? No, God gave you that desire of your.
Okay, so I was critical of her. Hypothetically, if she wanted to press this further, she could press this by saying, "Hey, I forgot what the atheist name is. Hey, atheist, you're this question that you're doing. You keep on bringing in concepts of God being all good, and you are here assuming seems like a value system about suffering being bad and whatnot. So you're assuming a value system." But under your worldview, you don't have the conceptual framework to support this value system. And I think you can make a pretty good argument that if she's going to say her value system comes from like an evolutionary process, that process doesn't give her confidence in thinking that her value system is accurate. I have a video that I did a while back summarizing an argument related to that that I suggest people come out. So even though she's preaching a little too much more than I think is appropriate in the situation, there is a kernel of something, if she had taken it and pressed it, could have been interesting as a response, but it's maybe she'll get there. We'll let her finish.
Heart to stand up for things that are unjust, to be angry when you see the persecution of children. But if we are image bearers of him, how much more does he also share that anger for our suffering? But he didn't throw up his hands and say, well, figure it out, humanity. He became suffering for us. Where there is deep, where you go against God, and there is a deep, Lord Jesus, give me
I just want to make sure everyone knows I'm not mocking here.
the word. When you go against God, he takes that serious because he's just. And because he is just, there had to be a repercussion for what humanity chose. He didn't just decide to throw up his hands, like I said. He became both the judge and the judged in what he did on the cross. So all I can say, even if you never just hear anything out, I'm
just going to point out that I think her understanding of atonement, this idea that God was judged and judged and just on the cross, however she phrased it, I think that's not accurate theology. I wrote an entire book arguing about why it is that Jesus came and what it is he does to save us. It's not about God needing to punish Jesus in our place. I have a book about that I'll put on the screen. And in that book, I talk about some stuff related to problem of evil. So if you were interested in what I was saying before, maybe check that out. But this whole framework that she's going on with that stuff, I would say no.
say, look back.
And by the way, if I was an atheist and we had more time, I would potentially rip into that as well, because I'm just like, okay, like there's just entire elements of that framework of God punishing innocent person in your place. God has to punish to forgive, all that. Like there's elements she could attack there too. And as I said before, the more statements you state, the more statements you make, the more things you put on the table, the more areas you have to attack and the more areas you have to defend. And so tactically saying all this stuff, I think is a blunder.
On the cross, you studied theology, you went to school for it. But I would almost say that sometimes our knowledge and our desire for knowledge gets in the way of what the Lord wants to do in your heart. So that is all I have to say. Look to the cross. The cross is the reason why we have redemption for the very evil that is here on the world.
It's very evident that you have a lot of conviction with what you're saying and that it means a lot to you.
I'll give it to this atheist. She's very kind and respectful. I'll give it to her. I think, yeah, I'll give it to her that. I'll be honest, if I was in her shoes, I mean, if you've watched this channel, you might know I'm a bit snarky, just a little smidge snarky. So I might not be as kind. I should be, but I'll give it to her. I'll give credit to where credit's due. You,
and that it perhaps is transformative for you. And I think that matters. And I'm certainly not trying to take that away from you. I think everything you said, if that means something to you, that's great. And I want that for you. I want your well-being. I'm not really open or available to suggestions or any assumptions about me or what's in my heart. I don't think that's appropriate because I'm not doing that to anyone here. So going back to the prompt, not much of what you were talking about had to do with why suffering exists.
Suffering exists because evil
I wasn't finished.
I wasn't finished. By our
Okay, we're gonna get spicy maybe. Let's go.
choice. That's why suffering exists.
So that is not enough for me. I don't think that that's enough of an explanation for the scale of why children are going through what they're going through.
But notice how this has shifted, right? So because they because they let her get away with making an argument and with unjustified premises and non sequiturs in the beginning, now she's shifted it into saying, why is there suffering? Because originally she was saying God can't exist with suffering. Like, she was putting forth the argument. Now this is shifted to, why is there suffering? And that's an open-ended question. And now she says, well, that's not enough for me. Well, it seems to me like there's potential here for this to be a moving the goalpost fallacy, where no matter what someone says, no matter what explanation somebody gives, she's just going to say, well, that's not enough for me. That's not enough for me. It's like, okay, so like, whether or not you psychologically are convinced by an explanation isn't really the point here. The point here is you made a claim that these two things are incompatible. People seem to have, even though it was kind of indirectly and not as clear cut as someone like me would want, they kind of offered some ideas about how there isn't this incompatibility because God could have these properties and because of these things, this could be his reasoning for allowing X. They have engaged with your problem. The last girl didn't engage with it super great at the end there. I'm with you there. But you can't just keep doing this moving the goalpost fallacy. You can't just keep shifting and saying, well, I'm not convinced. If I'm in this response and someone's doing a Dillahunty and they're just saying, I'm not convinced, I'm gonna say, cool, I don't care whether or not you're convinced. I care about whether or not you can respond to my argument. And so this is one of those areas where I want a philosopher. I want someone who can just like really like cut past all the nonsense and just go straight to the heart of the issue and press them on the logic.
Through because someone a couple thousand years ago ate an apple. The concept of the Christian hell is both illogical and immoral.
Ooh, y'all, I'm telling you, the phrasing of these, it happened in the last one. She said it's both illogical and immoral. Ooh, these are both statements that if anyone on the panel, right, if they were philosophers, like, it'd be, okay, she's made the claim that they are logically inconsistent. This is a huge claim. She's saying, so to say that something is illogical is to say that it is a contradiction. Like, it's logically impossible for you to have something that is like a square triangle. It's logically impossible for it to have only 4 sides and only 3 sides. That's what is something illogical. A married bachelor is illogical. A contradiction is illogical. So when she's saying it's illogical, that's an extremely strong claim that she would have the burden of proof on. Let's see if they can put the burden of proof in here. And then also, she's saying that it's immoral. So that's another area that she's claiming that there's some type of moral affront. So that's assuming some type of moral standard. That's assuming some type of moral framework, and then they could press her on that, and they could run some type of argument on her there, and get her to justify her moral standard. But then there's another problem of this, which is that she says the concept of Christian hell is both illogical and moral. I'm going into this assuming that that it's primarily going to be out this kind of eternal conscious torment, infernalist model of hell. But when I was testing my sound earlier, I heard little snippets of this conversation. And so I know this is something that gets brought up, but they could push and say, listen, you're saying the Christian concept of hell is both illogical and moral. You could say, hey, listen, that is assuming a specific model of hell that is not, universal to all of Christianity. So if you wanted to advance this as a problem that Christianity as a whole has, what you would need to do is you would need to show that exegetically this is the only model on the table for a Christian. And then you would be putting her into the position of arguing that, of essentially doing an exegetical argument against something like universalism or conditional immortality or something like that. Those are all 3 that I just talked about. Those are ways that they could take this strong claim that she made, turn it around, and then put her on the hot seat and make her justify these assertions that she's making about it being illogical, it being immoral, about this being the Christian conception of hell, stuff along those lines. So this is just another statement. The way she phrased this makes me think that she's just not good at philosophy. Like, someone who is engaged in philosophical argumentation is going to be thinking about the way I phrase this, what is it committing me to? The way I phrase this, what are the things that can get shot back on me? I've been working on arguments, an argument from beauty, and this is something I think about and I have going on my head. How can people parry this against me? How can people turn my own words against me? So this is just your typical village atheist. She's nice, she's kind. And I'm not saying she hasn't thought about this at all, but her philosophical nuance on this is lacking. Let's see if this panel of ladies can bring it home. I'm not going to remember all 21 people's names on this, so I'm just going to refer to them as the atheists and the ladies and so on and so forth.
Hi, I'm Casey.
I'm Angie.
Casey. Maybe I can remember Casey.
I'm Shadell.
I'm Chinasa.
I'm Jillian.
Nice to meet you. So, the concept of the Christian hell is both illogical and immoral. So, 2 parts here. Illogical, I think from that, I really find the idea of omniscience with God, which is the Christian God is everywhere.
That's not what the definition of omniscience is. The definition omniscience is the idea that God knows all truths or something in that ballpark. Omnipresence is the idea that God is everywhere.
And also the Christian understanding of hell is defined as a separate, well, in many definitions, defined as a separation from God. I don't think that that is logical. It doesn't make sense in the parameters of that logic. And then immoral, I do not see any
So let's talk about the idea there about omnipresence in hell, because this is something that I think from the snippets I heard earlier is going to come up. So there are debates and discussions in Christian theology about how to understand omnipresence. Is it the case that God is actually present at every specific spot, like ever? Or is it the case that God has the potential to be at every spot? Is it the case that God's causal powers, are over all parts or all spots or something like that? So there is discussion and there's debates about, is it the case that God transcends space? Is it the case that God transcends the need to be in one specific location? So her coming out the gate when talking about omnipresence, which she miscalls omniscience, it's assuming a specific conception of omnipresence, which someone could just say, hey, listen, this is one among many, so your whole illogical thing is based upon that. But then even if we grant it, the idea that hell is somewhere where God's presence somewhere that God's presence isn't at, somebody could say, hey, listen, and this is a defense that's been used at some point, I don't remember by who. They could say, listen, God is present in hell, but his presence is not manifest in hell. And there's no Bible verse you can point to and say, oh, look, like this is the verse that says God's presence is in hell or something along those lines. She's really bringing up philosophical discussions and theological discussions in Christianity. So there's a lot of different options that someone could go through here just on that part that she had just said. Someone could say, hey, listen, someone could say God isn't present in hell because of their definition of omnipresence. Someone could say God is present in hell, but they could say God's presence isn't manifest in hell. So for instance, let's say that you and I are in the same room. Maybe you're like in that like one half of the room and you're like hunched over or under a desk or something like that. I could walk into that room and you not realize I'm there, right? You don't know that I'm there with you. I have not made my presence known to you. I have not manifested it to you. And then maybe I come up to you and I pat you on the back. I say, hey, what's up? At that point, I'm manifesting my presence to you. So someone could maintain that God's presence is in hell, but his presence is not made manifest to the denizens of hell or something along those lines. So there's options that one could go with here. This is not, and none of this really gets back to the illogical. No, it would be illogical if somebody was going to say God's presence is everywhere and hell, and God's presence is not in hell. If they were doing that, that would be illogical. That seems to be a pretty straightforward contradiction, at least on the face. But there's just so much more to it than that, as I just mentioned. So let's get on to the next part, I guess.
Moral justification for an eternity of torture. Again, this is the widest understanding of the Christian hell. We're totally open to talk about different iterations. There are other kinds of hell, but from the majority of the understanding of Christian hell, illogical and immoral.
A part of your argument speaks to the proportionality of punishment, and I wanted to...
No, stop. Like, if I'm in this audience, like the thing I want to go to, or the thing I want you guys to go to as your friendly neighborhood theology coach, the thing I want you to go to is either like getting her on the illogical stuff that I talked about, or said, okay, you said this is immoral. Here is something you could maybe flip it on her. Say, wait a second. Where are you getting this concept of morality from? And if she's an atheist, probably 9 times out of 10, or probably 10 times out of 10, what she's going to do is she's going to say her conception of morality comes from an evolutionary process. And then there's an argument. There's an argument. I'll put a picture of it on my screen. I have a video on my channel talking about this, where you can argue that if the framework that she is bringing to the table of how she got her moral intuitions, that is not a framework that should give her confidence in her moral intuitions being accurate. And then so because she has no confidence in her moral intuitions being accurate, there's really no reasons to have a problem with whether or not her moral intuitions conflict with Christian theology. Like there's no reason to think that there's actually a butting up going on here that's significant and worth building one's beliefs around. So you could do something like that, and that would all just be like the kind of the epistemic problem. They could go ahead and do other stuff related to that, like a more traditional moral argument for God's existence. So that's really what I think in this scenario. These are the two biggest areas. Now, in that other area, that would be kind of changing the topic. So if you're like, James, it's changing the topic, kind of, but also you'd be like firing shots back and showing that she doesn't have grounds to bring this objection, which I think that would be acceptable here, and I think that'd be a better way to play this game. Okay, so then. Okay, I guess I'll let her go ahead and keep going then.
To bring you back to some real life examples of punishment that are not exactly commensurate to the
okay, so here's another thing that I forgot to mention. So Casey, the atheist, is working on the framework that a person in hell is being like eternally kind of afflicted with a type of punishment or torture by God. But among people who hold to eternal conscious torment, you could still have people who could say something like, listen, the suffering that you experience, this is not something that God is inflicting upon you as punishment. Rather, this is just the natural result of the decision you've made to cut yourself off from God. If we think of a tree, right? If you cut a branch off that tree is going to wither and die as a result of being cut off from that branch. And if we were to imagine ourselves as that branch, it probably wouldn't be an enjoyable experience to feel ourselves withering and dying. And so someone could say, listen, if you say to God, no, I don't want you, and God respects that, and he says, okay, you don't want me, fine. Here is the room for people who don't want me. You will have your way. I won't bother you anymore. That is in virtue of you cutting yourself off the kind of, source of life and the source of knowledge and goodness and all that. Your result is going to be something that is eternally unpleasant. Now, there's another line that you could go along that's similar here. And you could say, listen, if we are all, this is kind of a line of thought I think C.S. Lewis would go with. You could say, listen, we're all in the process of becoming a certain type of people. We are all developing habits. And so right now, you in your life, there are certain habits and you have certain dispositions you have, which if left to their own, this kind of, your moral machinery is going to break down. So while right now she's kind and she's, being respectful and things like that, there may be habits that if they were, left going for eternity, they would get perpetually worse. Like there's kind of, if we think of morality as kind of a continual habitual process away from God, you will, so to speak, turn into a hellish creature because you are rejecting the medicine, so to speak, for this condition that you have. What's going to result from that is you turning into, over time, a being whose existence is hellish. So C.S. Lewis talks about the idea that we are all turning into a hellish creature or a heavenly one. This idea that every person you see now, they will either be one day something that if you saw now you'd be tempted to worship, or a creature so vile that if you see them now, you see them only in your nightmares. He says that in something like The Way to Glory. So yeah, there's several avenues you could go down here for explaining why it is that a person has eternal conscious torment that doesn't involve the idea of God actively inflicting a punishment on someone. And I would say there's probably biblical grounds for thinking that God's way of punishing people or God's wrath or something like that is God in a sense saying to people, okay, like your will be done. God letting us have the natural result of our, consequences. That is, it can be a way of punishment or a way of thinking about wrath, even if God's not actively doing it. Now, we'll go back to my example earlier of like when my mom let me have the sugary cereal. It's like my mom wasn't actively like punching my stomach, right? She wasn't actively like causing the pain, but she said, okay, like you want this, like you can have it, see how it goes. And so that may be what hell is like. So there's just a lot of premises that are baked into this. There's a lot of different avenues for attack. I think based on the snippets I heard earlier, what they're going to do is they're going to go into why God's just in just this punishment aspect. So I don't think that's the way to go, but I'll let them go.
Proportionality of the time that it took to commit the crime. I like to say that I have a prosecutorial background. I was a prosecutor for a few years, so I understand how crimes are done, and a lot of things are taken into consideration when determining that proportionality. For example, if a criminal walks into the court and they have a history of doing that same crime, we do what's called enhancing their punishment. Because they have a history of doing the same thing, we get to take that into context. And I think what happens is when this conversation comes up as it relates to the proportionality specifically, I cannot say that word today, we like to reduce crimes against God, which is what the Christian understands as sin, to these instances and these moments and these minor things. But in reality, all sin and all wrongdoing is sin against an eternal God. So if you sin against an eternal God, I do think it naturally follows that there are eternal consequences associated with that. Even when you look at the crimes that are done against certain public figures, like as a previous prosecutor, there's a different sentencing range for harm against a prosecutor or against a judge. And it's not because they're better than anyone, but it's because of what they represent. If a judge is representing the law and enacting the law, if a crime that is done against the judge is measured out, it is a defiance against the law itself. So when you say that it is, I guess, illogical to have the punishment be eternal when we are talking about an eternal God, I think it fails to take into those things into consideration.
Okay, so this is getting into waters that I've treaded with my work on atonement. If I'm in Casey the atheist issues here, I'm gonna say, wait, this idea that like the sentence of my crime should be proportional to the amount of time that a being has existed. Like, wait, what? So like if I I don't know, punch a man, I have aggravated assault on a man who's 20 years old, that should get less of a sentence than if I do it. I should get half the sentence than a man who if I punch him if he's 40 years old, because of the time that they've existed is less. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I would point out that in our own justice systems, I think many of us are going to have the intuition that at least to a large degree, the punishment shouldn't be different based on the social economic status of the person. So I think that if a reckless teen goes and he intentionally kills maybe I don't know, a homeless man, I think that his punishment should be no more or less than, all else being equal, than if that same kid had went and killed like a senator's son or something like that, or like a really rich like software engineer who was living in Silicon Valley. Like, I don't think it would be appropriate to say, okay, we're like, this is, he did it to this person, therefore we're going to take it more seriously. Now, there is some range, or there is some degree where we would say this, like if you went and killed a king, it would make sense for the punishment to maybe be worse. But even then, I think one could make an argument that in that scenario, maybe the issue that is elevating that punishment, it isn't just the status of the king, it's the harm that it does to the kingdom and stuff like that. So there's going to be assumptions that are baked into this. I'm going to question because of my issues with the underlying atonement framework that's undergirding these. But then I'm also going to point that the language that she's using here, it's going to get really dicey and shoot back against her when it comes to her conception of atonement. If you say that my sin is worthy of an eternal punishment because God is eternal, then and you try to go to a penal substitutionary atonement model, I'm going to say that what you've just told me is that Christ didn't take the penalty for your sins. Because you've told me the just punishment for my sins is eternal hell or something like that. But Jesus didn't experience eternal hell. He was there for 3 days or less or whatever, right? And so I'm going to say this problem coming at you this way. And there are ways that people may try to get around like what I just said there. But I don't think it's going to work because she just explicitly said that the punishment needs to be eternal, which means unending. And if you think that Jesus went to hell and he suffered punishment there, like it clearly ended. So I think this is problematic. I doubt that Casey's going to bring up some of those concerns that I just brought up, especially because they're atonement related. But I don't think this is the right line of thought to be going down on this argument.
And I also want to say one thing that people may not always consider is the inertia of the soul. If, for example, someone hates God, who's to say they're going to stop hating God for eternity? The idea is that my position here on earth is only a precursor of what my position and my perspective is going to be for an eternity. And if God is a God that is loving, I think the most loving thing that he could do is to respect a person's free will. If you didn't want God in the past, why would it make
This is good on you. I don't know you, I don't remember your name, but this is good. This is that type of stuff that I was talking about earlier. So like that's good
sense for you to want God in the future. We have to understand that naturally we are eternal. We have an eternal soul. And so we're gravitating towards eternity. It just depends on where we're going. And the things that I stated before are things that I think we have to take into consideration.
So I'm not sure that again, this is kind of going into because we have.
One thing I want to add on before I let Casey finish is there are some people, so I think William Lane Craig has talked about this some in his work. There are some people who say, hey, listen, when you're not doing one sin and getting an eternal punishment for it, you're doing a sin and getting a finite punishment, but when you're in hell, you just keep sinning, so you just keep on racking up punishments. I'm not saying I necessarily endorse that idea, but it's interesting, and it seems kind of related to what the other lady was talking about, so that's something that might be relevant to hear as well.
Free will, therefore, this scope and magnitude of suffering, in the case of hell, resonates. I'm not sure that that tracks, because again, this goes back to another component of the concept of the Christian hell being immoral.
Yeah, so I don't think she tracked what that lady was saying. So she wasn't just saying because of free will, therefore the scope is eternal. She specifically talked about how if you are eternally rejecting God, then God would be, I think, loving to respect your free will or whatever, to allow you to eternally reject him. So I don't know that Casey tracked on what the Christian woman was saying there with that argument.
Is because I think it is immoral for a creator being to set up a system in which people would end up suffering forever after that creator being created those people. Yes, free will exists. Free will was created by God according to Christian understanding. Everyone who was going to be on these paths of eternal torture were created with the knowledge and understanding by a supposedly perfectly moral creator being, and that logic doesn't track to then therefore create them, know that they would supposedly use their free will for eternal damnation. And again, we are finite beings. There are atrocities that are committed.
So this is where, as an open theist, I get to be like, yeah, God didn't know this was going to happen. Like, I don't think that God created you knowing. When God was creating the universe, I don't think he was like, yeah, Casey's going to hell, got that locked in. Like, I don't think that's what goes on. I think that God knows, like, that some people are going to go hell, or knows that maybe there's a high probability that at least somebody goes to hell. But I think that God is sincerely holding out his hand and waiting and wanting and hoping that all people come to know him. I don't think that God that knows who all is going to choose him. And I think I can argue that from a biblical perspective as an open theist. And again, I have a video that's talking about that, so I'll just reference people to that video if they think that's a wackadoodle idea. But if I can do that, oh boy, I've just swept the legs out from under your argument here, because this, he knew this would be the case thing is a pretty significant thing. I really doubt any of these women are open theists, so we'll see, but I have my doubts.
On this world that are felt for generations. I mean, generations upon generations of time due to one person in some cases, or a multitude of people and their actions and their choices. That is certainly not to be downplayed. There is no conceptualization of an eternity, of a never-ending amount of time that is justifiable for even generations, because it's long for us to think of generations of harm, but that is nothing. It's literally nothing in the face of an eternity. So why would a creator being who is supposedly perfectly moral create these people knowing and creating them anyway? Not just that they were going to be damned forever. I guess we'll stick with the prompt, that they'll be damned forever. I don't think that's moral.
Yeah, so let's suppose I wasn't an open theist. Even if I wasn't an open theist, I would say, like a Molinist might say something like, hey, listen, God creates these people knowing that they will choose to go that way, but nonetheless, maybe God creates them anyways, because a world in which they are there, in which they exist, that is a world in which more people come to know him, or something along those lines. So for instance, it may be a world, a Molinist who thinks that God knows all your decisions that you would make in any situation. They might say something like, hey, listen, God, before he creates, he knows that a world in which no one goes to hell is a world that has like 4 people into it. Maybe a world where only 10 people goes to hell, that's a world of like 150. And so it may be that God is, so to speak, wanting to have more and more people who come into this loving relationship with him. And then what someone like William Lane Craig is going to say, listen, if God doesn't create the bigger world just because the people who freely choose to go to hell, then what he's doing is God is giving the damned veto power over the saints. He's giving the people who rebel against him the ability to rob the blessed of their relationship with God, and that certainly wouldn't seem moral. So there's elements to this. There's a lot of ways to push back on this. I still feel like there's justifications of her premises that haven't been cashed out and that could be pressed on. We'll see if that happens.
For the same reason that anyone procreates, when you have a baby, you know that there's a possibility that this child could grow up to be a Hitler, or they could grow up to be a Martin Luther King. But because of the outpouring of love that you have in your heart for you and possibly your spouse, you decide to procreate, make a child, essentially like God did, making us in his own image. So God does see the future. God is also loving. And because of the outpouring of love that he had, he made a decision to have creation, to have them made. And as a result of that, one thing that I won't say it's dismissive, but one thing that you kind of just skirt to the side is the fact that we being created in his image necessarily means that just as he has volition, we have volition. So if God is loving and he wants to have pure love reciprocated back, it's necessarily, free will is necessary to that equation. We can't just be created without any real meaningful choice. Otherwise, you claim that you want to be a robot, but I don't believe that. You're too passionate. You're very passionate. You're very articulate. You think things through. I don't believe, obviously that's a hypothetical, but I don't believe that you would be comfortable with not having a free will for the sake of not having sin or consequences or suffering like in the past prompt. So that's to answer that specific point.
I was saying that I would give up my free will for the sake of any and all of other people's suffering. It wasn't really like my personal circumstances. But again, going back to the free will, I don't think that an all-powerful God is limited at all, right? Conceptually. So then,
And that's just her not knowing what omnipotence means. That's not like omnipotence does not mean any proposition can be actualized. So that's an error on her part. I don't know if any of these other ladies are going to catch it. We'll see, but that's a major big one.
the parents, that's what it was. So you were saying it's just like a parent having a child and not knowing if they were going to be Hitler or Martin Luther King Jr. Many differences there, but probably the key one for this argument is that God would know. God would know and therefore would end up intentionally, I guess, creating Hitler. So I don't agree with like that analogy. I understand your point, and we can have a separate conversation about justice.
This is the power of open theism, because you can be like, nope, I think God's omniscient. I think God knows all propositions, and he wouldn't know whether it becomes, the Martin Luther or the Hitler. And then when she's flabbergasted by that and she tries to press you on that, then you're an open theist, Chad, and you just explain the philosophy to her, and you can point to the biblical verses saying, this is the position in the Bible, and now what, right? So this is where this is my point in the video. I get everybody to be open theist pilled, right? And this argument isn't what made me be open theist. I became an open theist because I think the biblical data supports it, and then I thought after the biblical data pressed upon me, I was like, oh, philosophically, there's some pretty good arguments here that really make this make sense. And then it was just kind of like a fun icing on the cake that I also get to just sidestep these type of issues by being an open theist. So I was like, okay, have fun.
In general, but my question was, is there free will in heaven?
Free will in heaven?
Yeah.
This is about to get sloppy. I can feel it. This is about to get messy.
Oh.
I thought we were talking about hell.
Right. This is related.
Yes, there's free will in heaven. But
there is free will in heaven.
Yes, there's free will everywhere.
To turn away from the
Yes,
Creator?
to turn away.
Okay, so this concept of eternity and eternal bliss is not accurate according to Christian understanding?
Well,
you could leave heaven?
Well, yeah, you can get kicked out.
There's a lot of confusion that comes here. So the question about does someone have free will in heaven? You can say yeah, you can say no. Let's just go with yeah, because that's what they articulated. Whether or not somebody has the ability to do something and whether or not somebody will do something are two different things. So right now, I have free will. I have the ability to stick my hand in a running blender. Guess what, everybody? That's not going to happen. I'm not going to willingly stick my hand in a running blender, even though I have the free will to do that. You can be confident on that. You can bet on that. Why? Because I'm at the point, I as a person, as a human being with an intellect, I have matured to the point where I understand cause and effect to such a degree that is not good for my mental, emotional life, right? And so you could say, if you want to maintain that there's free will in heaven, you could say, hey, listen, even though we all could hypothetically sin in heaven, we won't, because our spirits will be regenerated, transformed, will be, more mature and so on and so forth, to the point that there will be no desire for us to have that sin. We'll just be developed to that point where it's going to be as appealing to us as sticking our hand in our running blender, or maybe even less appealing. So I know the type of argument she's going to try to get out here. I'm not sure if the other ladies are going to be super prepped to handle it, but it's a bad argument. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They've done pretty decent so far, so we'll see how it goes.
Out of heaven.
You can get kicked out of heaven.
So,
okay, I didn't know that. I don't think that's the general understanding of the Christian heaven and hell, so we might be having a different conversation.
I disagree with that. I would say that in heaven, when you
see, this is the problem with these type of formats, and I'm not saying this to bash on any of them. If you have four Christians in front of you, they're just gonna disagree on some of the nuts and bolts of things. And if I'm in Casey's position, this is a game show. I like to see my opponents fighting amongst themselves and cutting each other's arguments off. right? Like this is a good thing for her, right? If I'm in her shoes, I'm like, oh yeah, like fight amongst yourselves, like contradict each other, and run out my time, right? Because remember, she comes out, the way this works is she gets to make a statement, she gets to make an argument, right? And her argument stands, and it's there. She's kind of at like the top of the argument hill, and they're trying to climb up and like throw her down. If they're all just like clawing each other down on the way to the top there, this works in her favor. And this is something I kind of talk about a bit in my video critiquing these Jubilee videos. Is it's something similar, except in a Jubilee video, it's even kind of worse, because in the Jubilee videos, not only can you just be like cut them off and whatever, you can like vote them out. Like you have the power to shut them down, which is more power than anyone in the chair has. So yeah, I don't like these type of formats, but also, and like if it was just a one-on-one discussion, it wouldn't get as many clicks, it wouldn't get as many views, because you couldn't get this fun little. You couldn't get this. Oh, you can't. Yeah, you guys can't see it. You can't get this fun little title of one Christian or one atheist versus 20 Christian women. Like come see the bloodbath. Come see the gladiatorial games. That's what all this is about.
You reach that place, your will is surrendered and your will is united with the will of God. So there's not a need or a desire to have a will in that sense. It's extrapolating what we have here onto the heavenly realm.
So we're talking about the surrender of free will. Okay, so that's kind of my point here. And also I would like to point out that apparently God can create a perfect utopia where people have sort of a surrender of free will, which is still a choice, which is technically free will. So again, the logic of a heaven and hell really does break down with that.
I do want to say there are more than 45,000 different
Okay, so I don't know if she's going to go where I want to go here. So this is a common argument of like, oh, listen, we're going to, we can all be sinless and perfect in heaven and either in have free will or not have free will or something like that. Therefore, why couldn't God just do it from the beginning? There's a pretty crucial symmetry breaker here, which is that in heaven, we've all chosen to be in that state. So in heaven, we have all either chosen to give up our free will, or we have all chosen to follow God and have our spirits developed into our state. Like what I'm going to say is we are created in a position where we can go left or right. We can reject God or we can follow God. Or God kind of in a sense creates us neutral and he lets us choose our own adventure. He lets us choose which path he wants to go. And so if God creates you and he keeps enough distance from you, so to speak, to allow you to make the choice to come to him, that is very different than God just creating you already in that relationship with him. So to give maybe an analogy, I'm a married man. My wife has entered into a government contract or agreement. I don't know. Like my wife and I have an agreement with one another that we are not going to participate in certain activities with other people besides one another. Right? I'm the only one for her. She's the only one for me. Right? But she chose to be in this situation. So she has given up her ability. She's given up her right to be with other men, right? And like now it's just with me, right? But that's something she chose. It would be very different if I chose for her, if I made her enter into that contract with me. So in both scenarios, maybe I have like a hypothetical drug that like makes women like fall in love with me and all that. Let's say I have a hypothetical drug. I kind of spritz it at their face and, oh, James, you're so great. Your philosophical abilities, they astound me. Please marry me. If I had that and I just did that to someone, that would not be right. That would not be proper because I would be robbing them of the ability to make that choice. But it's another thing if, I date my wife and I woo her with all my great, my charms and my great wit and humor and, of course, my rampant, astounding modesty. And I do all that. And she chooses to come to that place with me. In both of those scenarios, the end state is still they're not going to have anybody else, right? Like in both of those instances where I do it via a drug or I do it via the traditional means, the end state is they're still agreeing to have nobody else but me. But these are two very different situations because in one, they chose to get to that point with me. They move towards me in that direction. Similarly, with God in heaven, the people in heaven who are not sinning and they have that utopia, that's a situation in which they have all freely chosen to follow God. They've all freely chosen to enter into that relationship with him. So this is a kind of presented often as a gotcha by atheists, but it doesn't track once you get the overarching conceptual framework of what is going on in the Christian system. So we'll see. We'll see if any of the ladies take that response. I don't think they're going to, but we'll see what happens.
Interpretations of Christianity that exist today. So that means there are multiple opinions on what hell actually looks like. The Bible does describe that hell exists. Some people believe that means that non-believers are burning up in hell for all of eternity. I don't believe that personally. And in the Bible, it actually doesn't really describe that. It describes that like the judgment, like there is judgment. There's no denying that judgment does happen. People are judged for what they do on earth, according to like Christian faith. However, in Revelations, it only describes that the devil, the false prophet, and I believe the Antichrist are the ones who are thrown into the lake of fire, and they're the ones who are tormented forever and ever. Whenever it gets to the point when it talks about how the non-Christians are thrown into the lake of fire, it is the second death. It is described as like an ending. And I think even most atheists or agnostics today, you believe like whenever you die, what happens? It's just like everything's over.
No idea. I don't think there's sufficient evidence to make any positive claim that there is or isn't anything. I have no idea.
Okay, but in general, from what and I appreciate that. Thank you for speaking. But in general, I believe like the opinion is just like it's just nothing.
Oh, sure,
after.
yeah. Yeah.
Like for like in general, it's just nothing after. So whenever we get to applying like Christianity, there's the idea of like there is a resurrection for like judgment on Judgment Day. Everyone is resurrected. They are judged according to the law. Anyone who's not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, they are judged, and then they die a second death. But that means but it's not an eternal conscious torment, which I believe which is what you're talking about when you say the Christian iteration of hell, eternal conscious torment. I do believe that is actually something not of God. I do think that is immoral and not reflective of God's nature.
I think you bring up something really interesting.
Okay, so she's going with the conditional immortality route, and as I pointed out in the beginning, so this is good. So she can say, hey, listen, you're objecting to just one area of one specific way of viewing Christian doctrine, and this hasn't been the way that people have always held to or that everybody holds to now. What I would have liked for her to do here is to clarify and press a little bit more. And say, hey, Casey, there's a variety of views on this. This is where I stand. And so if you're going to take your argument and you're going to present this as a general objection to Christianity, what you would need to do is you would need to show that my position is like an untenable interpretation of the Bible or something like that. Because if you can't show that if my position is a plausible, interpretive option of the Bible, then your objection, you're actually not objecting to Christianity. What you're objecting to is a specific doctrine and a specific in-house issue in Christianity. So Casey, can you show me now that, my interpretation of the scripture here is improper? And if not, are you willing to admit that you actually don't have an objection to Christianity? So like in doing that, you're pushing it back on her to either admit, okay, you got me, this isn't actually an objection to Christianity, this is just a specific model, and I think that has like rhetorical force, or you're then pushing it on her. If she really wants to say that like, no, this is a problem for Christianity in general, then you're putting an atheist on the spot, making her try to like give a biblical argument, which the fact that this woman's conditional, she holds to conditional immortality and she referenced some sections in scripture, I'm gonna guess if I put these two up against each other on the eternal conscious torment and the conditional immortality, the eternal conscious torment and conditional immortality, if I'm going to put them up against each other in that debate on an exegetical point, I'm going to root for the woman who was just talking. I think she probably knows more of her stuff on this than Casey. So that's just how I think she could have pressed it just a little bit more. Because by not pressing it there, she kind of, I think, is going to give Casey an out, and Casey's going to get to maybe like weasel out a little bit. But if she had phrased it how I phrased it at the end and said, okay, give me A or B, either admit this isn't an objection against Christianity or engage with me on this biblical argument, and then she would then be pushing, she'd be, taking in the driver's seat of the conversation, pushing back, all of that. And I do want to say, this is an important point to note that these are edited, and I actually don't know what the framework is, so it may be that one person I don't know how long each person gets to talk, so that's also important too. So it may be like, oh, I want you to have this back and forth. It may be that back and forth wasn't available at this time. So I've noticed that Casey will say something, and then woman like one will go, and then Casey will say something like woman two will go. Like this kind of that framework of working down the line. So some of the things that I'm saying may not be applicable, but this was this woman's first time talking, so I think she would have the opportunity to press Casey on that there.
Interesting, which is the fact that according to like the general, apparently not yours, understanding of the Christian hell, going back to the prompt a little bit, is this concept of free will. But I guess really the crux of this is, can we choose our beliefs? Because I don't know if free will is about making choices and making, sinful or non-sinful choices, that's one thing. But the hinging of the traditional understanding of the Christian hell is, if you confess with your mouth and you believe in your heart that God rose Jesus from the dead, Romans 10:9 or 9:10, I don't know. I don't remember.
It's close
but,
enough.
You will be saved. Thank you. So with that contingency there, with that like understanding, can we choose our beliefs? Like, to me, that is really the crux of, in that case, not necessarily in your understanding of hell, in that case, it is immoral to...
Okay, so Casey just dodged that, right? Okay, so this is why, and she might have dodged it regardless, but the other woman who just spoke like brought up a good point, and Casey's dodging it. So now she's going on to something different. So this is a pretty clear dodge on her part. She's not engaging with what the last woman just said. Now this gets into an interesting issue of what's called doxastic voluntarism. Is the idea can you choose your own beliefs? There's a good amount of literature of this in the philosophical world. So one thing you could say is you could say yes to a degree, right? So it seems like we all want to say yes. So if I said, ought a person believe that slavery in the US was wrong? If I said, is that something you should believe? Like if you came in contact with someone, maybe they were like really racist and they were like, oh yeah, well, this is great, and I was super into it. We would probably walk away from that thinking that person ought to believe differently, right? But if you say that person ought to believe differently, you're giving up the objection she's doing here, right? Because ought implies can. It doesn't make sense to say that a person ought do something different if that person can't actually do something different. So this is something that comes up in debates of morality sometimes in like meta-ethics or whatever. So if I said to you, I said, hey, it's really messed up that you didn't stop, I don't know, like the Holocaust. Like, Casey, like, why? Girl, you should have stopped it. The Holocaust, it was brutal. Like, surely you know this. Why didn't you stop it? She would probably throw up her hands and be like, bro, I couldn't. Like, what do you mean I ought to have done that? I couldn't have done it. It was like, yeah, exactly. To say someone ought to do something implies they can. So if you want to say there's ever an instance where someone ought to believe one way or another, you're going to be admitting that you think that they can choose their beliefs to some degree. Now, several things come up in this debate about this, and it may be the case that you right now can't like choose to flip a switch to believe something, but you can choose to engage in certain epistemic virtues. So you can choose to develop your reasoning skills, read from people who disagree with you, things along those lines. Put yourself in an environment where you're trying to learn more and stuff like that. And so if you have someone who they're an atheist and they really have given, they've never read, a professional Christian philosopher, they've never gone to church and talked with a pastor or a priest and like tried to work through these issues. They haven't done those epistemic virtues. They could still be faulted or something along those lines. Now, I have a video on my channel from way back where I actually I point out that there's actually a decent amount of like literature, and I guess you would call it like social sciences, about how atheists actually do know that God exists, and they're not going to like to hear this, but there's an interesting amount of literature that of like studies that have been done that seem to indicate that even hardened atheists, when they are tested and they're not given time to censor themselves, or we just kind of gauge how they respond to things, they intuitively think like the world was created by an agent. Like they intuitively have the same beliefs like and intuitions that like Christians that we have about God, but they're in a sense kind of consciously muzzling them. I'll put something on my screen to a video that I had from a while back where I cite some of those papers. And so in some sense, if the people in the audience or the people on the panel were familiar with this, they could say, hey, Casey, you can complain about how this, is a... you don't get to choose what you believe, but actually the studies that we have show that you already do believe this. So that's not going to be an out for you. But I would finish up by saying that it isn't just about belief. It's not just believing a proposition that God exists. It's about a disposition to him, a disposition of believing loyalty, like submitting yourself to him, turning from your sins, so on and so forth. So Casey's dodging here. She's not engaging with the conditional immortality proponent. And she's bringing up something that, while maybe is going to trip up people who aren't familiar with the topics I just talked about, they're not ultimately going to help her point.
Set up someone who can't choose their beliefs, because how does that work? And then therefore is sent to an eternity of torture? Because I guess what I would ask is like, do I choose personally to have like pride in my heart?
I want to go back to your prompt. Hell wasn't intended for people. It was intended for God's angels and for those that were going against him, because they did have free will.
Okay, great. So is the concept of free will who go against him, the angels, as you said, do they have free will? And if so, I guess what I'm asking is, do angels have free will?
Yeah, angels have free will just like we have free will, because we're all his creation. And if you're against God, if you're not for God, you're against God, and there is a place for you. So God created everything and everybody to follow him.
Yeah, so the problem with this is she's just going to she's just going to restate the objection, but with angels. Because now she's going to say, okay, great, like God didn't make hell for us, he made it for the angels. And then the same argument that she was pressing about us for humans, she's just going to be able to turn around and press it against the angels. So I understand why this woman said, like, you know, the stuff about this being made for angels, but this isn't, and I think Casey probably knows this, that this isn't going to be an issue with her argument. And I just sense from the way she reacted, she's probably going to point that out and be like, okay, cool, like, why we got create angels if he knew that, you know, he was gonna create this place for them, so on and so forth. Or like, why create it for the angels? Like, she'll just take the argument and she'll take it a step back and then she'll just represent it. Which, I mean, if I was in her shoes, I would be tempted to do something similar.
To serve him. If you're not a part of that plan, then there is a place for you. It wasn't intended for people, but if you want to follow that route, you can follow that route and you'll have the same ending.
So I love where this conversation is. I do want to get back on topic, but on the matter of heaven and legalities and the law, right? I want to just explain a little bit about what I believe what everything will look like in heaven. When we die as followers of Christ.
This just isn't the prompt. I think she started her thing by saying, let's get back to the prompt. And then it's like not the prompt. And I'm like, y'all, we gotta focus. We gotta lock in. We gotta play the objective here. Like, if you're in these conversations, you gotta play the objective. Like I play video games and you like get into a game. Like, what's the goal? Capture the flag. And you've got some guy like sitting in the corner, like sniping, just getting kills all game. Like, that's what you guys are doing right now. Like, I understand you think it's cool, like, to talk about heaven and stuff, but like, play the objective, get on prompt. And she's like not about to do that. I've heard snips of her comments when I was testing my sound earlier.
Christ Jesus, those who obey his commandments, those who walk in his ways. There is a covenant that is made. Now, a covenant is an alliance. A covenant is a treaty. It is a legal term, okay? When we decide that we are going to obey the commandments of God, we have made a covenant. So when we walk in that covenant, observe that covenant, and obey that covenant, we have broken the covenant that sin made, that with Adam and Eve. We have broken that covenant that Adam and Eve made with sin, with Satan. So when we go to heaven, we no longer have the sinful covenant that we had binded at the very beginning.
I don't know what this girl's talking about, y'all. I'm not trying to be mean. Like, there were several things there where like that one thing just didn't flow into the other. Yeah, I'm not gonna press this too much because it's not super relevant to the point. But this ain't it.
So with that in mind, I do want to talk about the law, because it is very, very important to think about that. When we go to heaven, right, the law will be reestablished. We will obey Sabbath. We will follow the 10 Commandments. This is just biblical prophecy. And it's also talked about throughout Genesis when Abraham is being promised his descendants through his seed. Now, that is a completely different topic. But when we think about the law and we think about morality, I did want to talk about your jewelry. Because
girl, this ain't the time to be talking about her jewelry. Y'all play the. I don't know who this is on the left, but girl, I feel you. I'm with you. I don't know. I'm like, this ain't it. This ain't it, girl. I don't know why we're talking about jewelry. First off, that law stuff, like, I don't like. First off, the law isn't going to be re-implemented. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, read Paul. He talks about the whole point of the law. It was a temporary tutor until the time of Christ. Like, we were under the law until Christ gets here, and now we're under the Spirit. So, like, no, like, the law isn't going to be reinstituted. We don't need to have more sacrifices. Jesus was the final sacrifice. Go read Hebrews if you don't, like, if that sounds like shocking to you and you don't believe that, go read Hebrews. Like, the entirety is Jesus' final perfect sacrifice. So there's some, like, stuff there, but this is like, this is what I'm saying. Like, do not sign up to do something like this unless you understand that this is a game. You have to play the objective, and like, you have some familiarity with like how to do these type of arguments.
Because here's the thing. Do you know what the sigil necklace?
I believe it's for the goddess of Hecate.
So here's what I see. I study the occult. I do study religion. These are the founding principles of our worlds.
I love her reaction. We're gonna go back again.
Here's what I see. I study the occult. I do study religion. These are the founding principles of our world's morality. So the 3 moons on your necklace, they symbolize the divine feminine, a triple deity.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
What is going on? This
top
is
of
so
that-
weird. Like first off, weird thing, but also the way she responded, like, oh, like thank you. It's so nice for you to know. It's funny. I mean, maybe Casey's just like, this is weird. Let's just go on with it. I'm not bashing her. Like this girl, like definitely like not on topic. Like need to play the objective. But this is like so bizarre.
The pentagram represents Baphomet or the bull. So you have an androgynous sigil there. Now, let's talk about the formation of the law, because I do want to
What are we doing?
help you understand what it looks like on a term of morality. I want to help you
I think this is a good indicator of what I was talking about earlier about how other people can get in your way in these situations. Like some of these other women on the panel, I feel like if they could just go one-on-one with Casey, I feel like we could be like, just let them cook. Like I feel like she doesn't get to talk a whole lot. I feel like maybe she could press more. I think it was maybe her said some things. I was like, okay, she's tracking along the right way. So the time, like the ability for them to make their argument. I don't remember this woman's argument a whole lot. The ability for them to make their argument is now being obstructed, and the time is being utilized by her, and she's just doing nothing for the cause. I'm not trying to be mean to you, girl, but like you're not doing anything for the cause here. This is like way out of left field. This is why these type of formats are just horrible. This is why I say these are not conducive for truth. These are not like you cannot go into this situation with the mindset of anything other than I'm on a game show. This is a game. I play to win. Like you just can't, because you're gonna have someone like this come in like out of left field. You can't treat this like a normal conversation. So anyways, yeah, this is very evident of my point that like your own teammates will like shoot you in the foot here. Like your own teammates will hurt you in this type of setting.
understand that, because I know that you haven't, read your Bible in a little bit, and I hope that this may, make you want to do that.
I just would say that if you call into question the legitimacy of hell because you feel like it's illogical, then it undermines justice in general. If you don't agree or like the concept of hell, that's the one thing. But if we were talking about cause and effect and how logic follows certain formats, then we have to consider that there are consequences to our actions. And that's essentially what hell is.
But to interrupt, I'm sorry, but like the consequences of our actions, how the Bible describes it, the wages of sin is death. Mm-hmm. It's death. It doesn't say eternal conscious torment forever and ever. It is death. It is an ending. But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ. So I think.
So this is the problem. Well, now what was it an apologetic conversation between the atheists and the Christians? Now it's turning into a theological conversation between the two Christians. These formats are bad. It's a game show. It's for blood. Like that's why they do this. This is they want like the person who puts this on, like they know that stuff like this, like it does well. If you're watching this right now, if you're watching my video, this is probably evident of the fact that, like this type of content does well.
That's something that, like, at what she's talking about is the fact that a lot of Christians believe that there are going to be billions of humans just tormented in hell forever and ever, while we are just in bliss in heaven. That's supposed to be something good, and that a good moral God, like creator God, would agree to. And
Which is the key, because I think the argument is that the concept of justice, I'm certainly not denying. I'm not an expert in justice, but I understand that there are consequences for actions. But if we take that to the step of the Christian understanding, a creator being who's supposedly perfectly moral created these people to make these terrible decisions to then end up in hell for eternity, whereas we've already established that there can be a perfectly lawful, according to this logic, a perfectly lawful where we have free will kind of heaven without eternal torturing, to her point.
Well, the formation of the law came from, obviously, the story of Moses in Exodus.
And the law.
And why I found your necklace so very intriguing is because the entire...
I have to believe, I think they cut this. This is my theory. This is my theory. So, like, when she was talking a while ago, they cut it to the other girl, to the other woman. And now they just cut it back to the thing. I think this was originally what she was talking about earlier. I think they've cut the conversation. That's my theory.
Higher foundation of God leading Moses to literally become the leader of the Torah was based on genocide to an androgynous God. So when you've mentioned a lot the abuse of children, and I love that you have this moral sense in yourself that you would never want to see children suffering. But what happened in Exodus? Pharaoh literally saw the Hebrews thriving. They were literally doing according to what God said, to be fruitful, multiply, living in harmony, following in his ways. The new Pharaoh saw that, and he wanted to genocide them. So he did it in his religious way, because he actually participated in water worship. And not just water worship, but...
What does this have to do with the prompt? Fam, what does this have to do with the prompt? What are you doing here? Like, no. This is like, okay, side tangent. Now I'm not going to play the objective for a second. I feel like a lot of Christians aren't good at organizing their thoughts when they're presenting information. I'm not saying I'm the best at like all points, but there are times I listen to like sermons and I'm just like, this is a bad sermon, or you're a bad preacher because you're a bad writer and you don't know how to like organize your thoughts. And like, you know, I was like, there have been times I sit in a sermon and I'm like, if this sermon had a thesis, what would it be? And I feel like that's kind of what's going on here. Like, girl, where are we going? Like, this is just so off topic.
He participated in the worship of the god Hapi, which was an androgynous deity that represented not only the triple deities that we see in the Egyptian pantheon, but also represented this basically blood sacrificial transaction between children and between also virgins, etc. So Pharaoh sacrificed those children because he was religiously inclined to do so. So would you say that Pharaoh...
The girl on the left, the woman on the, I say girl, I don't mean girl in a demeaning way. The woman on the left is just over it. And I feel you on a spiritual level. Like, I just feel like how I'm feeling listening to this. Like, I can just see it in her body language. Like, she's not having it either. Like, just let's go.
Deserves punishment, deserves justice for what he did to Hebrew baby boys who did nothing.
Yes, I do 100% think that justice should be served. If you're going to talk about the story in...
So I do want to point out that if I'm an atheist in this situation and she pulls out this stuff in Exodus, like, I've got a lot of stuff I can fire back at you. I'm going to fire back at stuff about like God killing the whole world with the flood, some of which were innocent. I'm going to fire back about what Casey, I think she's about to fire back with. I think I heard her say this earlier, that I think she fires back with something about like, okay, like there's innocent Hebrews that are struck down by God. There are sections in the Old Testament where God, at least is presented as commanding people to go into an area, kill people, leave none alive. It includes the women, children, so on and so forth. So if I'm an atheist in this situation and you bring this up to me, there's an area there where they can fire back. And I'm not saying that those are successful arguments. I'm not saying they're good or they should be, like undermine the Christian faith. But I'm saying you have to be tactical about the things that you put on the table. If you put a topic on a table, if you present an argument, you have to be wary about how that argument and the concepts of what you say can be turned against you. Because if I'm an atheist in this situation, I'll be like, you want to talk about it being wrong, killing innocent Hebrew babies? That's something you think is wrong? Like I could, that's something that you want to harp about? Like they could very easily turn that back against you. So I suspect, I think Casey does mention that a little bit with the Exodus stuff. We'll see if she goes to like the flood or the other areas about like the Canaanite genocide and whatnot.
Exodus, though, I would like to point out that the Spirit of God, he, him pronouns, came down and killed the firstborn children of all of the Egyptians as punishment. So maybe the punishment has been served there if that God committed infanticide.
But I guess just in general, what you and I agree on, what I will say, I do believe that there is judgment, that God will judge all of us for our actions. However, I 100% agree with you in the fact that it does not make sense that human beings would be tortured forever and ever. In the Bible, if you actually look at the text, it doesn't actually fully support that. You have to really use do some deep exegetical study to understand like all the context of everything said.
Because we're talking about the prompt, and the prompt is you think hell is immoral, and I just want to say that everyone is right. I believe that I agree with all the women, but it is not. And you said an eternal fire. That's because God is living out of time. It is eternity. So he's creating it for what he's creating it for. He did not intend it for us. He gave us free will.
Well, first off, what does God being outside of time have to do with this? Second off, God's not outside of time. Read some of Ryan Mullin's stuff on that. I don't even see how that's relevant to this debate.
Well, he intended it for his angels and for those who went against him. So yeah, we have free will too. So we get the same punishment as them if we go against God. Therefore, we are separated from God. He is omnipresent. He is in hell. There is in scripture that God is in hell. He's present in heaven and hell. We're separated from him. So once we die, we go to hell and we're separated from him. It wasn't for us. So to answer your prompt, yes, it is immoral. But when we're immoral, we go into immoral things, and that's hell.
Okay, hell exists. Hell exists, but humans do not burn in hell for all of eternity.
Well done. Well done. Christianity has done more harm globally than good.
All right, I'm going to skip this section because this video I'm doing right now is going to be quite long regardless. If you're interested in this topic, right, Mike Jones of Inspiring Philosophy has put out a bunch of stuff and done some debates on this. I'm going to say go do that. I'm actually probably going to do one more prompt. Yeah, probably one more prompt, just because if I don't, I think this video is going to get like super long.
The existence of the natural world does not imply a creator made it.
Okay, so this is an area where I don't feel like she has a super strong burden of proof. I don't feel like it would be like fair for me to try to say that like throw the burden of proof on her. So this would be an area that if these women did, this is going to show if these women did any prep work. If someone told you you're going to be in a room with an atheist and they're going to be debating things, surely they looked up at least one argument from natural theology, right? So there's several different paths you could take here. You could take like a Kalam cosmological argument or some type of cosmological argument that argues for God's existence based on like the existence of anything from cause and effect, the need for a first cause. You could do a fine-tuning argument that argues for God's existence based on the fine-tuning we see in like the laws of nature, stuff like that. There's other like ways you could go about doing it. You could do like design and biology or something along those lines. You could do like what's his name, Stephen Meyer does. So you've got options here. You've got like less popular options. You could even do something like psychophysical harmony, which has been pretty popular and talked about in the philosophy world lately. So you've got options here. We'll see if any of these ladies came prepared for this.
Hi, I'm Casey.
I'm Kaitia Lamore.
I'm Aaliyah.
I'm Akaira.
I'm Tahira.
Nice to meet you. The existence of the natural world does not imply a creator made it. So this one is pretty sticky and it's pretty tricky, but really the meat and potatoes of what I'm talking about here is all of the observations and measurements and understandings and conscious experience of the natural world or the universe and all that is contained therein does not imply or allow us to find any evidence of anything outside of it.
And just well, first of all, thank you for being here. I think you're doing a great job articulating yourself and being respectful. I do appreciate that. And obviously, I believe in the creator of the Bible. But when you talk about a creator, are you just saying any religion, any creator? Are you mentioning the universe? Like, is there any sort of like created designer? Or is it just the Christian creator that you're mentioning when you're talking about the world and its creation?
So both. We don't have any awareness or ability to evidentially substantiate any designer outside of the universe. In this context, we can or not speak specifically of the Christian God, which I think is even less likely than a designer of any kind.
Okay. And so your worldview is evolution, Big Bang. Like, could you explain your thoughts on
Stop. No, you belong to it. No, if you're going to have I know that you guys knew you were talking with an atheist, unless they just lured people in off the streets and were like, hey, do you want like free potatoes? Oh, and while you're here, debate an atheist, which I don't think is what happened. Like, I know you guys knew that you came into this going to have a conversation with an atheist. How do you not have some argument from natural theology prepared? How do you not have some, okay, I think you're wrong, premise one, or I think you're wrong, let's talk about fine tuning? No, this is not, sorry, this is a bad start. This is not, when you say, what is your view then on this or that, what you're then just doing is, in this situation, she made her comment. Now you're in a situation where the audience expects you to punch back with something, right? To come back with something. And you have the point here to kind of this direction she's pushing on. You get the chance to push back, right? And hopefully overpower the reason she's presented. Because here's the thing, she actually hasn't presented any argument yet. So all she said is the existence of the natural world doesn't imply a creator. She hasn't like done much. She hasn't made much of an argument. So if you came out swinging with something like fine tuning and you said, hey, listen, we have all these laws of nature and they fall into a very narrow life permitting range. This is extremely unlikely to happen. This is, not predicted under an atheistic view of the world. This is predicted, or this is more likely under a theistic view of the world, and you had some quotes prepared by a famous astrophysicist or whatever. I'm like, you'd have come out swinging here, and if you had made a really strong first response here, you could have got her on her heels, and you could have I think pressed her. But now this is just rhetorically, this is a bad way to play the game. This is a blunder. This is what we call losing.
Okay. And So your worldview is evolution, Big Bang. Like, could you explain your thoughts on how creation came to be, just so that we're clear, because there's so many opinions about it. So I would like to know so we have a good basis for the conversation.
Sure. So I think that there are. So I do believe in the Big. I do recognize the legitimacy of the Big Bang theory and the theory of evolution. I do think that we can study and measure and understand, not just with our tools, but logically speaking, all the way up in our past, up until t=0, which is to say the very beginning of time in this universe. We can understand all the way up until that point. I'm not a physicist, but they're talking about soup of particles. I don't know what that means, but they're talking about it. They've got that figured out. I don't think we can know what was before that. So as far as what do I believe, I don't have any stance. I don't think that it implies a creator being. This could be a simulation. This could be a dream of an alien. I think that certain ideas are more likely than others. It's probably not a pink unicorn. You know what I mean? So as far as what I believe, I don't really have a belief because I don't try to have beliefs about what's outside of this universe.
Okay, and I would say just for me personally, I like bringing up the topic of apologetics because I do believe that there are people who are very well studied. I know you mentioned that some people have things figured out. I don't think anybody does. I think there's a faith aspect to any belief, even if it's atheist, because none of us were there. So I feel like through my studying of apologetics and the archaeologists, historians, and all of that, there's actually a really good documentary called Is Genesis History? I learned a lot about when you're talking about carbon dating, when you're talking about evolution, and when you're talking about the flood and sediment and just all the age of the earth. I don't think that 5,000 years versus billions of years is a heaven or hell issue, but I do think there's a lot of things that people have studied that have drawn more evidence to a biblical creator versus just coming out of an explosion or a big bang. And I would say that's where I come from. But
okay, all you've done is describe your position. What's the argument? What is the piece of data that you've pointed to that is evidence that implies, right? Because you just kind of I don't know if gish gab, sorry, you kind of gestured at a handful of issues. But if I'm the atheist in here in this situation, I'm gonna say, like, what's your argument? Like, what is the aspect of the natural world that you're pointing to and saying this is more likely under theism than under atheism? Like, what's the area you're pointing to? And she hasn't done that yet, and we're 3 minutes into the new prompt, and so this is not good. This is just it's burning up precious time, and you haven't gotten anywhere.
I understand what you're saying, that it's hard to imagine even for us as Christians, like there was something before nothing, like there was something before this. And I think one thing personally that stands out to me outside of the Bible is just consciousness. Like we came from an explosion or these single cells organisms, and then it's like, but what about consciousness and like our conscience and morality? To me, there has to be some sort of basis for that in a creator. So that's like my personal stance and how I feel about it. But also, like I said, apologetics, I think, is very important. And I want to give other people a chance too. But I would also like to know, from your standpoint, with apologists and experts in their field, where do you think they're getting this information, or do you think they're misconstruing it?
What information? You haven't presented. What information are you talking about? You didn't give us any. You didn't like appeal to fine tuning. You didn't like pull a Stephen Meyer and talk about like information in the cell. Like if I'm the atheist here, I'm gonna say like what are you talking about? Like what information are you asking me to explain? I feel like I don't feel like I'm gonna be harsh on these girls if this, or these women if this is how they act. If this is. Like, there's just no excuse not to have a argument for natural theology ready to go in this situation.
To fit a certain belief, or like, what are your thoughts on that specifically?
Sure. So a couple different things there. I know that there is this assumption that atheists believe there is no God, and that might be true, but the technical definition and the way that I identify as an atheist is a lack of belief in God. And that is very different because I'm not making the claim that there is nothing. I'm making the claim that because there is a universe, that doesn't imply that there's something. I'm not going to be the one to say that there for sure is either way, right? So this is why.
That's not her definition of atheism is not correct. And if you want to know why it's incorrect, read the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's online. There's an entry on atheism written by an atheist where he talks about definitions for atheism. So this isn't super relevant to the discussion, so I'm not going to bother bringing it up. But I recommend reading that article to see definitions of atheism. It's not just lack of belief in a God.
We kind of talk about the evidence being, the burden of proof is on the person making the extraordinary claim. And in this case, an extraordinary claim is that there is anything outside of this universe that we can't measure, we can't understand, that we can't study. So I want to give everyone else a chance to as well, I guess.
Thank you for.
Yeah, so I want to point out, so she slipped. So I do agree with her. The burden of proof is on the others at this point, and the first woman didn't live up to the burden of proof. I do want to point out she's slipped in some language about an extraordinary claim, and this seems to be extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that kind of sloganeering is, I think, problematic. So what I want to point out here is that it seemed like she was suggesting that there was something like inherently problematic about saying there's something outside the universe, in the sense of it being that we can't understand it, or that we can't measure it, but there's going to be premises in that argument that need to be justified about, like, why is the standard or burden on me somehow higher because the thing I'm postulating is like can't be measured? Like, it seems like if I can give an argument for God's existence, or a cause of the universe that has these theistic properties, whether or not that can be measured, like, that's not going to cut against the argument, especially if it's like a deductive argument where the premises entail the conclusion. Like, that's not going to matter. But that's not really worth nitpicking her a whole lot about, because it was just a passing comment. So okay, the first woman in green wasn't not great. Maybe the others can bring it back
for that.
So essentially, we have to pay attention to what's around us, right? From a practical standpoint, we can infer or conclude that a book has an author, or let's say, my shoes, they have someone who created them. So on a very, very practical level, we can conceptualize that everything we see in the 3D realm has a designer. The scripture also says that in Psalm that the heavens declare the glory of God. So, we can't ignore the fact that we are.
So appealing to Psalm now, it's going to be question begging, because she's going to say, I like, you're assuming the validity of your book. So that's, if I'm an atheist, I'm going to say, I don't think the Psalms are right. I don't think they're true. I don't care about them. That's what I'm going to say if I'm an atheist. And then if you say, well, everything we see has a designer, and you're pointing to your physical objects, like that gets into a whole host of issues. Like, I know your shoes have a designer. I know that somebody designed them. If for one thing, because I can look on their tags and they say, and people like make careers out of being shoe designers and so on and so forth. Like, we have specific reasons for thinking your shoes were designed, whereas maybe a rock formation outside your house, like if you're walking and you see like a collection of pebbles, you probably don't think that specific collection of pebbles is designed. So like there's going to be some properties that are more proper to infer design from than from something else. And so I doubt that if you just had a collection of rocks, I would say you might think the physical objects are designed. But if I said that specific arrangement, you probably don't think they were designed in that arrangement. So I think there's going to be problems here. And so she can maybe press back and be like, well, the specific arrangement of your shoes might be designed, but why think the particles of your shoes are designed, or something like that. But there's a bigger issue here. A bigger issue is that it seems like you're setting up a scenario where you're going to say everything has, like, all of the things we see have a designer, therefore we should think the universe is designed. And it seems like you're then setting up a causal principle, which is like everything that exists has a cause. And you, for sure, don't want to be using that in your natural theological arguments, because then all she has to do is point out that would entail that God has a cause as well. And then if you say, oh no, but he doesn't, then she's just going to get you on this fun little, like, she's going to get you on this fun gotcha and say, well, listen, if you can exempt God from the things that have to be caused, then why can't I exempt the universe? And so this is why, if you look into arguments for natural theology, generally arguments, so for instance, William Lane Craig, who's popularized the Kalam, his structure of this argument is whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore the universe had a cause. And then he does a conceptual analysis on what the cause must be like because of the nature of the universe. And then in arguing that the universe began to exist, he draws on like philosophical arguments that there can't be an infinite past, and then he also draws on scientific arguments and evidence about the beginning of the universe and the Big Bang, stuff like that. Now, I think Craig's arguments is good. It's fine. It's okay. I actually like Andrew Loke, who's another philosopher who's specialized in this area. Andrew Loke has, I think, a couple of books that are free. He has at least one free book talking about the Kalam cosmological argument and the teleological argument, and I'll put it on screen. It's free. It's very good. I will say this is academic philosophy, so if this is your first time reading something like this, it's going to be a bit in depth. I like Loke's argument better because I'm going to put it very briefly here. Like, this is off the top of my head summary. It's going to be more like, hey, listen, we see there's cause and effect in the world. This cause and effect, it can't be infinite in the past. It's like, okay, if it can't be infinite in the past, there has to be some type of first cause. And then we do some type of conceptual analysis of what the first cause is. And then we give some type of argument there. I like something like that better. And again, like if you look in his book and you find the premises, it's probably going to be worded more precisely than that. That's just like an off the cuff kind of summary. I like the wording of this a little bit more because it's something I think Craig has problems with in his work is just stuff related to like the use of the word the universe and what it means to say that it began to exist and thing along those lines. I think it's a little bit more of a tighter argument the way that Locke does it by just starting off the cuff, talking about, you know, chain and cause and effect. Is that infinite in the past? Because if you can get someone to admit that there is a first cause, you're cooking. Like you like have to, like you're pretty much a significant majority of the arguments behind you, because then getting from there's a first cause to that cause is something resembling like God, it's a whole lot better. Because then what you can do is there are some philosophical arguments for why the first cause should be thought of as being in a personal agent who has like free will. Locke gives some of those arguments, but then also something you could do is you could say, well, listen, we know there's a cause. We can look at the effect. We can infer things about the cause by looking at the effect. And you say, okay, let's look at the effect. Let's look at the natural world. And then you could just kind of get into some of the typical arguments. You could talk about, okay, we see the natural world has these laws that govern it, and there's a sense of order. And there's an entire argument actually that draws on the existence of these like natural laws that order things, and why that's evidence of, you know, a personal creator. You have a really strong argument called the fine-tuning argument or teleological argument that draws on how the kind of laws that govern the universe, when we look at them, the laws, if we were to kind of look at all the different range of possibilities that these laws and initial conditions like fall into, if they were tweaked just slightly, like in a very, very slight way, they would not be life permitting. And there are several laws or constants or parameters or initial conditions that if they just tweaked very slightly, they'd be different. It's kind of like you could picture this as thinking of like if we look into the control room of the universe, if we were to look into the engine room of the universe and we were to see a bunch of dials, and these dials each affected some, you know, aspect of some law or a constant in a law or initial condition or something like that. What we see is these dials all set in this very narrow range that they need to be in for us to have life. And you can say, hey, listen, this is predictive. This is very, very unlikely under an atheistic view of the world. This is not very unlikely under a theistic conception of the world. So while theism predicts this, or at least it's not unlikely, atheism doesn't predict this, and it's very unlikely. And so that constitutes evidence. So you could do stuff like that. You could appeal to stuff like information in the cell. So Stephen Meyer is a guy who made kind of a name for himself arguing about some stuff related to that. You could then go into the typical arguments
In a realm, and God has given us the opportunity to relate and to connect and to find meaning of the things that are around us. And then how do you reconcile gravitational strength and cosmological consistency? If we were to just imagine or reverse engineer everything that was created, we go back to the creation of the world. How do you reconcile the scientific structure or perfection or order that even gives us the ability to, you know, be here?
Mm-hmm.
So like if I'm an atheist, how do I reconcile what? Like what's the piece of data that's being pressed on me? Like the order, is that it? I mean, I think you could probably make an argument based on, you know, order and regularity in the natural world, and philosophers have done that. But like you would actually have to present that argument before you would try to press that point. So if I'm an atheist in this situation, like I'm sitting pretty easy and I'm feeling okay, like I'm fine on this because no one's really given me an argument. Like she started to gesture towards something that may be used in the fine tuning argument. So in fine tuning arguments, there's a reference of like the laws of gravity or the gravitational force or like the cosmological constant, stuff like that, and those things that I said kind of fall in this life permitting range. But they didn't really flesh that out. They didn't really give me anything to go on that if I'm an atheist. So I'm just going to be like, wait, what is it that I'm having trouble like explaining under my worldview?
Yeah, that's a good question. So going back to just because we see books have authors, watches have designers, just because we are able to create things does not imply that everything was made by a creator. It's possible, but that doesn't really imply, which going back to the prompt, as far as the fine-tuning problem, why this universe is perfect for our species of life and the Earth, all of that, the mathematical constants, I grant you that for sure. So this is kind of, I think it's called the observer paradox, but we as this species, as humans, can only observe this one because of all of these fine-tuned constants, because of all of these very specific physics. That does not mean that there are not other universes, the multiverse theory, that there are not other ways of life, that there are not other mathematical constants that don't exist outside of this universe. So that doesn't really, again, imply that a creator made this one. The existence of consciousness exists in this universe. That doesn't imply that it doesn't exist in others.
Okay, so she started to, so this is a pretty common objection to like fine-tuning arguments, which is say, something, there's a multiverse, there's lots of different there's a bunch of different universes. And hey, listen, well, if we didn't, if life wasn't permitting, we wouldn't be here to observe it. Like that. And this is something that gets talked about, like William Lane Craig talks about this, I think, in his work. I think Lucas Barnes is a contemporary cosmologist who has written a book on the fine-tuning argument. I think he probably talks about this in his work. Robin Collins is another philosopher who has done a lot of work on fine-tuning. So very, very simple thing here. Whether or not we would be here to observe the fine-tuning, like if it wasn't there, that doesn't do anything to offer an explanation for it. So there's a thought experiment that comes about in some of these discussions. Imagine you've committed some crime and you've been sentenced to death by a firing squad. So they get, let's say, 100 trained marksmen, like top of their class, top of their field, all have a pretty high KD ratio, right? And they all line up, and you're there and you're tied to a post, and they say, ready, aim, fire, and you hear the shots and you close your eyes and you're like, I'm gonna die. And then you like open your eyes and you look down and yeah, you didn't get shot. Well, that's pretty great, right? And now if you would ask, well, like, why did all the marksmen miss? It would be ridiculous for somebody to respond. It would be like, hey, listen, like if they didn't miss, you wouldn't even be here to ask that question. So we don't need to bother with figuring out the best explanation for this data. Like that's ridiculous. Like the fact that you would not be there to observe the phenomena in question, that does not negate the need to provide, explanation for the phenomena in question. And with the multiverse, there's several issues with the multiverse. So one, like that whole like, oh, we wouldn't be here to observe it. Like get that out of here. That doesn't do anything about our need to explain the data. Second, I'm going to point out that this is, this violates Occam's razor. So Occam's razor is going to say that we shouldn't postulate causes beyond necessity. And what I'm going to say is a theistic view of the world in which you have one God who creates like the one earth, who designs it, that is simpler than postulating a literal infinite amount of multiverses. Like you are multiplying causes beyond necessity there. Like your explanation is getting more and more contrived and ad hoc and has more postulates. So I'm going to say it violates Occam's razor. And I'm going to say that the God postulate, not only does it explain the the universe and the fine tuning, I'm going to say it explains a bunch of other stuff that comes up in these discussions. But then you have another problem, which is if your response to something like fine tuning is to just to say, well, there's a bunch of universes going around and this was bound to happen in one of them. Therefore, it could just be by chance. In no other area of our lives would we take this type of explanation seriously. Imagine you're sitting at a poker table and you're playing and the guy next to you gets royal flush after royal flush after royal flush, unless he gets it like 12 times in a row, right? And at this point, you're like, dag nabbit, I'm done. I've had it. Like it's like an old West scene. Like you kick back you kick back your chair, you whip out your pistol, and you're like, you're cheating. You know, like and you start making accusations. All right. Now imagine he says back to you, like, listen, I know this seems really improbable, but we live in a multiverse. An infinite amount of universes exist. And so it's just bound to be the case, that at some of these universes, even though it's really improbable, it's just bound to be the case that in one of these universes, I'm going to get like 10 royal flushes in a row. I'm not cheating. I don't know why you're inferring I'm cheating. Like, no one would be like, oh yeah, actually that makes sense. That's a fair explanation. Let's play another round. Like, no one's going to think that that's a convincing argument. Like this, like undercuts our ability to like use inferences and probability in general if you want to go with this. And then the final thing I'll point out about the whole multiverse thing is several people have pointed out like the multiverse itself is something like that's going to need to be like fine-tuned. So if you have this multiverse generator that's like spitting out different types of universes with different parameters, like that's itself going to be something that has some type of fine-tuning, and there are arguments about that. So just in general, like the multiverse stuff, it's not going to get you where you want to go. It has a lot of problems. I don't think many of these people are going to be able to press her on those things and stuff like that. And everything I just said was kind of a sloppy, just like summary of those issues. I'd recommend reading work into guys like Robin Collins, Luke Barnes, William Lane Craig, Andrew Logue, stuff like that. If people want to know more details about that.
I think that doesn't really point back to the prompt of like why, like, okay, you could say that because we have the natural world, that doesn't imply a creator and that you reject the intelligent design theory. But there's still something rather than nothing. And I think that poses the question of...
All right, girls getting some Leibniz in here. Let's do it. I'm ready.
God, ? Like, there has to be a reason for all of this, because there's features of the universe that cannot be causally attributed to anything else in the universe. So whether or not you want to deduce it to like, oh, it's the Christian God, the Muslim God, it's just a necessary being, because everything follows cause and effect, right? So, that's how we explain it in this world and this universe, right? So it poses the question, why is there anything at all? Like, why me? Why you? Why trees?
So I think she's drawing on concepts, so maybe like a Leibnizian cosmological argument with her phrasing there, then also like the necessary existence stuff. I just don't feel like she's putting it forward in like a coherent, easy to follow argument. I feel like she has certain concepts and she's just kind of spitballing, referencing these concepts. But in this type of situation, you need to have if you like deductive arguments, you need to have like your deductive argument ready to go. Or you need to, if you like Bayesian arguments, because you're a Bayesian guy, you need to have like a clear-cut, prepared like presentation of your argument where everything is like, it's like this. Everything flows one to the other. So the person hearing it can get the force of your argument. Because I'm a Christian and I don't even think this is a good argument. All you've asked so far is, why is there something other than nothing? Why does anything exist? And if all I have is that, as an atheist, I'm not going to be too perplexed.
Why sun? Why air? That's really what the question of like what it is, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. I am comfortable with the God question mark. You know, if this is here, is there something? I'm comfortable with that question. Where we kind of crossed here is the fact that everything has a cause and effect. On quantum mechanical levels, there is no cause and effect. There are probabilistic laws. So the cause and effect of this happened because something else happened because something else happened, that breaks down on the smallest levels. At that point...
No, it doesn't. This is a misrepresentation of quantum mechanics. So if I remember correctly, I think Craig and Loke both engage with this in their stuff on the Kalam. Quantum mechanics, it just doesn't... There's nothing in quantum mechanics to support the idea that like those things aren't being caused. So there's debate here about virtual particles coming into existence, and sometimes people will present them as being coming into existence uncaused, but they don't come into existence uncaused. Like they come into existence because of like the fluctuating sea of energy and the quantum vacuum. Again, Craig talks about this a lot. I think Loke does as well. It's just simply false that quantum mechanics gives us an instance, or at least a clear-cut instance, of something violating the cause and effect. Now, whether or not it's indeterminate, that's a separate issue of whether or not it's cause, like whether or not we can predict it, or whether or not it's necessitated. That doesn't mean it's not caused. So this is just wrong.
It's like an 80% chance of something's going to happen. So the concept of cause and effect does break down when you get into.
So probabilities, you can't say that something has an 80% chance of happening without that probability being rooted in the cause. So like if I say something like there's an 80% chance that it's going to rain tomorrow, right? The reason I can put that probability on that event happening is because the event happening, it has a cause. Like there are these things called clouds. They're like in the sky and they hold moisture. Like the probability is sourced in something. The probability is sourced in the cause and effect thing. If I roll a dice, if you say there's an 80% chance of James rolling like I don't know, like it wouldn't work for a D20. If you say like there's a 1 out of 20 chance of James rolling a nat 20 on like a roll or something like that, why is it 1 out of 20? Why is that the probability? Because of aspects in the cause. The cause of the event is kind of multiple things going on here. It's like my hand rolling the dice, and then it's the nature of the dice. So like the cause, there's aspects of the cause that correlate to the probabilities of the effect. And so it doesn't make any sense to talk about for these probabilities in the absence of some cause. Like it doesn't make any sense. This is going to be, I think, vaguely somewhat related to some stuff that Locke gets into in his work when he's responding to certain objections to, I think, one of his arguments. So I'll point people towards that. But yeah, no, this isn't a good response on her part, but actually it wasn't a good presentation on their part. So, that'd be how it is.
To the really small physics. And so, and again, I don't think that because in this universe, cause and effect is always a thing, suggests that outside of this universe, that is also the case.
Yeah, so this is problematic. So when you talk about cause and effect or something along those lines, she seems to be treating it as if it's a type of like physical law of this universe, where it's more treated as like a metaphysical principle in philosophy. So this isn't something that you can just, so there's Alexander Proust talks about something called the principle of sufficient reason, which is kind of related to this, and he talks about how one shouldn't go about committing the taxi cab fallacy. So if we examine in our lives that there is this principle of sufficient reason, and it applies to the world around us, or a cause and effect principle or something like that applies around us, when we get to the end, or when we get to the universe, you can't treat it like it's a taxi cab and just dismiss it whenever you feel like it. Like that's ad hoc to just dismiss of this principle because you don't like where it's pointing. And so as someone like me, what I'm going to do if I'm going to run like an Andrew Locke style cosmological argument, I'm going to say, okay, listen, I'm looking at these causes and effects that we see in our universe, and I'm asking, where does this terminate? Where does these cause and effect terminate? And then when we go back and we look at that first cause, I'm going to say, let's see what we can deduce about the properties of that first cause. And I don't think this hand wave taxi cab nonsense is going to affect you with that. Because, and this is one of the things that, one of the reasons I like Locke's argument instead of Craig's, is I just don't deal with this our universe nonsense, right? I just don't even deal with that. I just talk about the chain of cause and effect. What's the first one? If you try to say there is no first one, you try to say it's infinite. Locke and Craig have arguments against that type of stuff. If you try to say it's a causal loop, Locke and Craig have arguments against that type of stuff. So there are philosophical arguments for there is a first. And at that point, once I've got you on board with there's a first cause, then I've got some arguments I'm going to run there.
I understand that. I think too, but God is outside of space and time. And when we see the first line in Genesis, where it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that's also now understood theologically to say, as God was creating. So when you said we have to understand where T equals 0, like the beginning of time, God is still constantly co-creating and sustaining this universe right now. So I think that it poses the question of like, and I like how you said that it's not that you don't believe that there's like no God, there's a lack of belief in God. So I think it just poses the question to conceive like, okay, it is plausible to believe that there's a God. Like you would say that, right? Because you didn't say that you didn't believe that it was like illogical.
I'm going to point something out. Also, so Locke has an argument in his work where if if you try to say, so if you invoke a type of causal principle like whatever begins to exist has a cause or something like that, and you try to say that only applies to some things but not others, so like, oh, our universes can pop into existence uncaused, but not some other things. He has an argument for why if something can begin to exist uncaused, then like there's like other things should be beginning to exist uncaused. It's not just like, hey, you don't have an explanation for why other things don't. He actually has an argument for like, no, we should expect this to happen, and he has that in his work. But yeah, so like there's going to be a causal principle at play here around the idea of like whatever begins to exist has a cause. I think that's something you're probably not going to get around no matter whether you go with like a Craig style argument or a Locke style argument. That's just something I remembered and I wanted to touch on.
You just said you have a lack of belief in it.
I think it's more likely that there is not one.
Okay, and wait, why would that be? In considering like the creation of Earth and that there is a universe, like why would that be?
Why do I believe that, or
Yeah,
why does
yeah.
the universe exist?
No, why would it?
Why do
you
I believe that?
That it's more plausible that there would be no God at all.
Good question. I don't think it is philosophically, logically, even evidentiarily possible to prove, understand, or see any evidence of anything.
But that's not the question. Okay, so she blundered here. She said she thinks it's less likely. She thinks the God hypothesis is less likely than the God hypothesis, right? So she made a probability claim. This is less plausible, less probable, whatever. And now this girl, or this woman, she pointed out, hey, listen, why I think that? Why is it one less probable than the other? But now she is saying something that's not related. Now she's saying, well, I don't think I can know, I don't think I can prove, or stuff like that. Let's rewind it a little bit.
Why do I believe that, or
Yeah,
why does
yeah.
the universe exist?
No, why would it?
Why do
you
I believe that?
That it's more plausible that there would be no God at all.
Okay, yeah, so the question is, why is one thing, because she's made a probability claim, why does the probability tip in her favor here? That's the question that's being asked.
Question. I don't think it is philosophically, logically, even evidentiarily possible to prove, understand, or see any evidence of anything outside of this universe. So
Okay, but that wasn't okay. So remember, she said, well, hey, listen, I just can't prove or give evidence or understand anything outside this universe. That's not the question. Whether or not you can prove, understand, or get evidence for anything outside this universe, that wasn't the question you were just asked. You were just asked to support your contention that your view is more probable. And that's, yeah, so like she's just dodging the question here.
if the Christian God is outside of time and space, I'm not going to put my faith into something that might be like that. That's just not how my brain works.
So first off, you shouldn't say that Christian God's outside time. Again, Ryan Mullins has a bunch of stuff attacking that. But also, like what she just said there, that's not related. Whether or not you want to put your faith into someone who's outside time and space, that's not the question. You were asked about your probability statement. Back up your probability statement.
I guess.
understand that.
Yeah.
I think you said, though, I love that you said this. You said logically, philosophically deduce. So when you're going by logic, I feel like the good logic will follow that you see that there's X kind of thing, like there's humans, there's dogs, and then you keep going down that there's going to be a reason why. There's a why for each kind of cause of thing. Not saying that there's a cause, you said the cause and effect breaks down, but if you keep going down, logically you could say, well, there's something rather than nothing. Logically, what do I deduce from there? There's some necessary being. Even if you don't want to call it God, that would be the next step in logic.
So logic, traditional logic, and I'm not an expert, but traditional logic only works if it has a scope, which is to say parameters of its logic. So the logic of what we're talking about here, within this universe, there may be cause and effect all the way down, infinite regress, but that does not, because logic has a scope, that you can't take that logic and apply it to anything outside of it.
What are you talking about? Like logic is not, logical laws, like laws of non-contradiction, are not typically seen as being something unique just to this universe. Like logical laws are something that would apply to any universe. These are metaphysical principles. Like these aren't just physical laws. So yeah, I don't know what she's talking about here.
Logic too.
That doesn't necessarily.
But that follows in the natural world. Even when we have math and computers, it's not based on classical logic. It's based on intuitive logic. And there's variables outside of scope. So what I'm saying is that the Creator, God, is outside of space and time. Even though He's outside of the scope of this material world, that does not mean that it's implausible or illogical to believe that he exists, because even in computation, we know that there's variables that are outside of scope that still affect the programming that's going on.
If you're going to apply cause and effect to something outside of this universe, then you would have to keep going and say that someone designed the designer.
I have a question.
That doesn't follow. So as I talked about, if you said everything that exists has a cause, sure, you'd have to do something like that, or everything that exists has a designer, you'd have to say something like that. But if you're careful with your causal principle and you say something like, no, whatever begins to exist has a cause, that's not going to commit you to anything. So if I'm running like an Andrew Loke style argument, I'm going to say something like, no, so we have this like this chain of cause and effect, like my parents caused me, their parents caused them, so on and so forth. Before that, maybe you think an asteroid, hit the Earth and it caused like the development of our ecosystem, whatever, something caused that asteroid. We just keep taking the chain of cause and effect back. Eventually, we're going to have a first cause. And then what I'm going to say is like, okay, we can deduce aspects of that first cause. And one of the aspects of that first cause is that it didn't begin to exist. It's eternally present. And the reason I'm going to say it's eternally present is because it's uncaused, and if it began to exist, it would need to be caused. But the whole point of this is that it is the first cause. And so if you try to, and so if I do this conceptual analysis and unpack it, and I say, okay, this is the thing that all men call God, and you say, okay, what caused it? I'm going to say you're not paying attention, because the whole point of this is we were talking about the first cause in the causal chain. So if I think that girl sounded like she had some familiarity and some background with like Leibnizian cosmological arguments. I think she needed to make it a little bit more tighter and like give like a premise-based argument, or if you want something more like abductive or Bayesian, whatever, just like formulate it as an argument and then present that. And then kind of, if you do it in that way and you're more clear with your presentation, then when she tries to make this type of, what caused God thing, you can be like, no, pay attention. This is the first cause. Nothing caused it. Because if you say, like something caused it, well, then it's not the first cause. So I think a little bit more precision could be made here. I think that woman was thinking along the right lines. I think she had some good ideas. I just think the prep needed to be better. And this is one of the reasons why, like, if you're going to do these live debates, you have to do lots of prep work. And to be clear, I don't really like doing live stuff like this anymore. I hardly ever get on TikTok and do live debates anymore. I used to get on TikTok and do like live conversations when I was younger, even before I had like a YouTube channel. I would get online and debate people online. And one of my reasons for not doing that anymore is like, if I decide, I want to get up and do a debate, like I know, like I have to get myself in a mindset. I have to memorize a bunch of stuff and I have to be like in the mode to do this. And like, I can do it. I just don't like doing that anymore. And so I don't really do it much. I might do it again, who knows? But if you're going to sign up to do a debate like this, like you have to do the prep work for that. Like don't accept a debate. Because that's what this is. Don't accept an invitation to something like this if you're not willing to do that preparatory work and come out swinging.
Were you deep into your Bible before you became an atheist, or were you always an atheist?
This is not relevant. Stop. Just no, this is not. You have a finite amount of time. They presented a statement. You have a finite amount of time to get to the bottom of that statement and to show that they're wrong and to present Christianity in a good way. This question is not helping that.
I was very, very Christian.
Very, very Christian. Okay. Would you say your transition or where you're at right now was deduced to a lack of belief or people not actually applying what they believe?
I see we're venturing into the no true Scotsman territory, but I went to public university to study religious studies and try and prove the validity of the Bible. That was what I thought my mission was. And as I studied more and more, the logic and the belief broke down and I was not able to turn back and lie to myself anymore.
Okay. When I hear stuff like things, I always think about what side of Christianity people were on. I think there's the full scope.
F for you. I don't think I've given an F on this yet. Maybe this woman I would give like a C- or a D. You F. This is not the prompt. This is not the debate topic. No, stop. Like no, just no.
Of Christianity, and then there's discipleship and what people actually apply and how hard they go and how they live it out. I think there's a lot of things. I even think there's so much throughout the whole entire Bible that speaks of the natural world and speaks of how everything is put together, even as far as what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat. And when you actually break that down on a scientific level, it actually makes sense, because you have these things in the ocean that are eating other things, and if we eat it, it makes us sick. Hey, New Testament, God gave us free will and said, hey, you can choose now. But it's just
Y'all, if I'm the atheist in this shoe, I mean, like, if I'm an atheist in this shoe, like, if you do something like this and you don't know who's coming, you never know. You might get someone who's like really knows their stuff. If I'm her in this situation, like, I'm just sighing up. I'm just sighing with relief. I'm like, okay, like, I'm not gonna look like an idiot today. I'm gonna look fine because these people don't know how to present an argument. Like, they don't know how to stay on topic. Not all of them. Some of them did decent, but none of them came prepared.
Very interesting to see how he designs and set everything up. And when you break it down and study it out, it makes sense.
At least none of these 4 came prepared to talk about this. I'm not going to say the other ones didn't come prepared for the topics that they were talking about.
Half the people that have something to say about the Bible are not even people that really studied it or even fully lived it out. To a certain extent, or saw it through. But I also believe that, yes, there's always going to be a cause and effect. There's always a reaction for every reaction, Newton's third law. So I don't know. I'm very curious as to why, if you've read your Bible and you see all these natural things.
Because she doesn't believe the Bible. Like, that isn't, like, if you have something in the Bible that says God did this and she doesn't believe the Bible, it doesn't matter. And the thing that she's questioning is, why should she think that these things in the natural world are more probable under theism than atheism? And you haven't done that.
Why are you so against it? Because the reality, the study of it on a scientific level is what's already there. They're studying what's already put there, trying to figure out how it got there.
What do you mean against it? Against what?
The idea that God could be the one that created all of this.
Well, it was a slow trickle, but it started with the lack of recognition that the Bible could be perfectly divinely inspired because of the history of the text and how it's been mistranslated on purpose to manipulate political agendas, all of that. So that's why we call it deconstruction a journey, right? It ends up, okay, well, if that's not true, then what about this? If that's not true, then what about this? And it got me all the way to my belief in God not really working. And to your point, we have
I think this highlights something that's really dangerous about, like, fundamentalist thought. Because, yeah, I went to a church when I was young. And I think I remember a pastor saying something like, if one of these things isn't true, none of it's true. And, like, if you tell people that and then they come across something that they don't think is true, maybe it's not even true, but maybe at least they don't think it's true, then now you've told them, like, well, okay, I don't need to follow any of this because this is clearly false. If they find something they think is clearly false, then they can do like, all right, well, it's all of it or none of it, then I guess I don't need to follow any of this. I don't think so. There's several things here about inspiration and whatnot. If you hold to divine inspiration, whether or not the Bible was originally, like, divinely inspired in every word, which I don't hold to that specific view of inspiration. I don't hold to something like verbal plenary inspiration. But let's say you did. Whether or not that happened is a separate issue or separate debate from after there was inspiration, the thing that was inspired, how was that transmitted to us? That's just a separate question. Like, if you say, hey, listen, there's this transmission process, and yes, there were instances in which people mistranslated things, there were copyist errors, but that doesn't really undercut our ability to have an accurate understanding of what was there originally. So there's, like, a whole field of textual criticism that's, given us, I think, great confidence in knowing what was originally written, especially, like, in the New Testament. So, like, the fact that there are these errors, like, the fact that we're able to recognize them as errors, like, that's part of the reason we can have confidence in the original, is we can recognize, oh, this is when this come about, stuff like that. So there's not an undercutting of a confidence there. But then I would point out that, like, how does that undercut the premise about the originals being inspired? It doesn't. So I think this is something that comes up sometimes when people deconstruct, is underlying the deconstruction is bad philosophical reasoning, bad abilities to deduce one thing from another. Is very sloppy reasoning. And this is why it's really important to teach people proper philosophical thought and how to reason from A to B and from one thing to another. And I would also point out that if her whole reason for believing in God was the Bible, then yeah, that's if she no longer thinks the Bible is, valid or something like that, that's going to undercut her belief in God. However, if we teach people that there are good arguments for the existence of God outside the Bible, which I think there are very good arguments outside of the Bible, without even touching on the Bible, then undercutting a belief in the Bible isn't going to undercut one's belief in God. And I would also point out that, like, if you teach people that there's evidence for Christianity and the resurrection of Jesus and stuff like that, And you can hold to that without holding to biblical inerrancy. Then when people come to things that they view as errors in the scriptures, well, now they don't need to just disregard the Bible, because they can say, well, okay, I guess that's an error. I guess maybe there's an error in, like, I don't know, Deuteronomy or First Kings or something like that. But I still have this really good evidence for Jesus' resurrection from stuff in the New Testament that doesn't assume like the reliability of the text. It doesn't assume the inerrancy of the text. It just approaches it as normal historical documents. Or maybe I have really good reasons for thinking that, Christianity is true, because there are some really, well documented, verified, cases of miraculous healing and cases of Christian prayer or something, along those lines. Then, like, their worldview doesn't just have to fall apart. I think that a lot of the kind of modern deconstruction movement, or a lot of the people who come out of that movement and end up losing their faith, like this woman, it's because in some degree they are victims of very, very, very bad education on the church's part. The church is not teaching people to think critically. It's not teaching them good arguments. It's a lot of times is relying on bad slogans and bad ways of thinking. And so in some way, she's a victim of the church's failure in educating people how to think. And you may say, well, it's not just the church's way. It's the other ways to teach people how to think. Yeah, but like, do you really expect like a public school system to teach people like really good critical thinking skills? Because I don't. I think they should, but like I don't. Like, and how are her parents going to teach her good critical thinking skills if they didn't get it, right? Like, someone's got to do it. So if you're really serious about a church and if you're in a church, all right, this is a bit of a diatribe. If you're in a church and you are involved in, I don't know, ministry or teaching to people, let's say college student or under, and you're not teaching them philosophy, you're not engaged in like natural theology, you're not engaged in philosophical thought and getting into these apologetic related questions, low key, you're probably just not doing your job, or like you're just not doing it super well, because there is a foundation that needs to be put in place there for a faith to remain. So there is a lot of people, they are active in church when they're young, they have a sincere faith, they're not taught the kind of how to think critically about these things, they're not taught about a good foundation of how to think about this stuff. Then they go to college, and it kind of sounds like this is what happened to her, and then because they didn't have a good foundation, not because they weren't devout, not because they didn't really love God, but because they didn't have a conceptual foundation for how to think about these things, their faith falls apart because they start getting questions that they can't answer, or the slogans that they've been told they don't work anymore, and so they start hearing other arguments which sound plausible. And the reason the other arguments sound plausible is because they're not skilled at recognizing a good argument and a bad argument, a non sequitur, and what actually is valid, and so they fall away. And so if you're engaged with youth ministry, college ministry, it really probably should happen before college ministry. If you're engaged in youth ministry or something at your church, and you actually want them to continue persisting in the faith, you got to do something. Because as much as you want to point your finger at someone like her and say, oh, she's just a sinful rebel, and like maybe she is, I don't know what like goes on in her life, like maybe that's an aspect of it, but like I suspect a good deal, I'm inclined to believe her that she probably was a sincere like Christian who was secure, like emphatic about her faith. And it probably was undercut from a failure in her church. And I personally don't appreciate it when Christians try to psychoanalyze every person like her and say, oh, this is really just, you didn't take this seriously enough. First off, even if you are right, like they probably don't agree with you with that. That's probably not going to be a good way to build a bridge. Like that's probably not going to be convincing to them. Yeah, this is just disappointing.
A 100% historical record of, in the past, whenever we didn't understand lightning and we said, well, it must be God. When we didn't understand volcanoes, well, it must be God. We have a 100% record so far of everything that we attributed to gods because we didn't understand it, or God, of eventually scientifically explaining it.
So that's question begging in a couple ways. So first off, this idea that like, oh, we saw volcanoes and we didn't understand it, therefore we just attributed it to God. That's a pretty inaccurate representation of how thought went. It's like people weren't just historically constantly attributing things to the gods. Like they understood like, oh, there's a process here, and they investigated it. And what someone like me is going to say is like, yeah, and they did this process because they had these conceptions of like laws in nature and like cause and effect, which were founded and given by their framework of like, there's a divine lawgiver. But setting that aside, It's circular to assume that everything has been given, a type of scientific explanation, because I'm gonna say, well, like, there's still things that like haven't been given a scientific explanation, like, or at least not a good one. So that's gonna assume a position on stuff like fine tuning. It's gonna assume that there's been a good scientific explanation given, such as like information in the cell, like the type of stuff that Stephen Meyer talks about. It's gonna assume like there's a good scientific explanation for the emergence of consciousness. Like, it's essentially what you have to do is you have to ignore a bunch of the arguments that are going on in natural theology and these type of debates where people are pointing to about fine-tuning and information and biological life and consciousness and psychophysical harmony and all of these different things. You're having to ignore those when you say, oh, we have a 100% track record. Because like what I'm going to say is like, okay, there are some things where people mistakenly attributed to deities that weren't, but that doesn't somehow like justify you in ignoring the evidence for these other things. You have to look at the evidence for each claim, and I don't think this woman has really taken seriously I don't think she's really researched seriously the data regarding fine-tuning of the universe. I doubt she's read Luke Barnes, Robin Collins, Craig Loke, any of these people who have written on these areas. I really doubt that she's read much about Kalam cosmological arguments or things like that based on what she said about, oh, somebody needs to design the designer. Like, her comments indicate to me she hasn't done real in-depth research into these things, and so this is it's a lot of posturing.
Scientifically explaining how it was created or the dynamic of it and how those things happened.
So my point is that just because we don't understand the initial cause of the universe, this is called the God of the gaps theory. It does not mean specifically that there has to be a God. I'm just saying that up until now, historically, we've had a 100% track record of proving things that we didn't understand and that we called God.
Okay, so let's talk about this God of the gaps crap a little bit. So this is like a really popular atheist slogan. So listen. It's in our normal everyday life, we make inferences to the best explanation. So we have some set of data and we make inferences about what is a cause that is, likely to bring that effect about. So imagine that there's a crime scene and a detective rolls onto the scene and the police are there. And we've got the police say, all right, well, Johnson, looks like there's a criminal, look like we've got a murderer on our hands. So we've got the victim, a knife is in her back. We've got some muddied footprints that, go from her body to the window sill. We've got the broken window sill. We've got some words written in blood. We've got like a message written in blood on like the wall. We've got signs of a struggle going all the way through the house. The neighbor next door heard screaming. They saw a dark figure running away. So it looks like we've got another murderer on our hands. Imagine if the detective said, oh, there you go again, Officer Smith, with your murderer of the gap. Just because you can't explain how all of these things could come about without postulating a murder, that doesn't justify you in just creating and concocting this villain. And, that would be ridiculous. Everybody recognized that would be ridiculous. Because in that situation, based on the data that we have, we can infer that it is more probable that these things would happen under the murderer hypothesis, under the criminal hypothesis, than if there was no criminal hypothesis. Like if we have two, hypotheses that we're comparing, criminal agent was there in the house, no criminal agent was there in the house. The data that we have is way more probable under this hypothesis than under this one. So we recognize, like, okay, the best way, if we're trying to explain why it is the case that this is there, we take that data and we say, okay, we infer that this is the best explanation. Now that maybe we're wrong, maybe there's other explanations we can consider, but just saying, oh, there you go with your criminals of the gap, like that's ridiculous. And so what someone like me is going to say, even if we go with like an inference to the best explanation or something like fine tuning, or we take like a Bayesian approach, I'm going to say, listen, I'm doing what we all do, which is I'm inferring what is the best explanation for the data before me. And if you just want to accuse me of doing God of the gaps, I'm not just saying I don't know what this could be, therefore. I'm saying the God hypothesis predicts this data better than the non-God hypothesis. And people who have written this work have explicitly done that. So this is, again, she's just a typical internet atheist. These are just everyday neo-atheist, TikTok level objections. These are not nuanced. These are not well thought out. To be fair to her, neither are the people who are responding back to her. They're also doing a poor job. But if any of these people had done their homework beforehand, this would have been, I think, a pretty easy dub for them.
Maybe in the future, that which we called God, the initiation of the universe, would be scientifically explained. I'm saying that based on our track record, that seems likely.
I disagree with that fully.
Okay.
I was going to say too, I think what she
Just saying you disagree doesn't make a difference.
was saying is not that like understanding how something works isn't understanding why it's even there at all. And then to pivot back to what we last said, I don't.
So that's a good question. So like, or that's a good point on her part. It's like, listen, to give a scientific explanation, let's say we have a scientific explanation, a good, actually decent scientific explanation for like consciousness or something like that. There's going to potentially be able to push this back a step and say, okay, but listen, like that's within the natural laws that we have. But why do we have those natural laws? And there have been arguments about this in the philosophical literature and natural theology about, why is it that we have natural laws that govern the particles that we have and not particles that we don't have? And there's, a harmony there. There's a bunch of arguments that essentially just hand waving to science that's not going to engage with all the stuff. And it doesn't really engage with the root issue.
Think that when you get back to, well, you have to say that someone created the creator. God is not a creation like us. God is outside of space and time. He's not one of the things that you see inside the universe at all. He's completely separate and different from our understanding. So you don't have to say that God was created because he's not a being like us.
Right, so totally. My point was that if you're using the logic within the universe that we see, that for the most part works of cause and effect, there's always a designer or something. If you're using that logic to something outside of the universe, which is to say that because this universe exists, it must have a cause, so something outside of it created it. If you're taking that logic and transposing it to something outside of this universe, then you would also have to start proving why that cause was caused. You're taking the logic of what we see in here, trying to transpose it outside of the universe, and that's what I mean by in that case. I'm not saying at all times.
And she's right. If they say that whatever exists has a cause, she's right on this.
But in that case, if you're using that logic, you do have to show that God was created.
And that's why it goes back to, I think, my previous point, is when we're talking about the beginning, it takes faith no matter what. Because, we could all...
Yeah, we're going to end it there. We're done. We're going to have 3 hours. There's other prompts, but we're going to end it there. Okay, so let me bring it back over here. So, yeah, okay, so listen. Concluding thoughts are really going to be the same thing that I said in the beginning. I'm going to be a little bit more sterner now. Don't you dare agree to do something like this if you're not willing to do the prep work beforehand. This could have been an easy dub. And I'm not just saying that because I've got a big philosophy background. When I was in high school, as a freshman in college, just with the apologetics and stuff that I had researched when I was in my last year or two of high school, going into college, I would have been able to hold my own with someone like this. You could study apologetics for a year and be able to hold your own against this. These are not difficult objections. I don't know these women. I don't know their background, and it may have been that if each one, I want to be fair here, it may have been that some of them who seemed like they had a familiarity with certain things in philosophy, it may have been that if they could have a one-on-one and gone more, they could have done better and teased it out. So I want to be fair there and say maybe there's just an aspect of the format. But there were some of them you guys clearly didn't have a plan. And if you're going to do something like this, you got to have a plan. You got to have you got to have your premises in order. You got to have your presentation in order. Whatever it is you plan to argue, whether it's a deductive argument or Bayesian or whatever, you got to go into this with a plan. And some of you guys just clearly did not have a plan in order there. And so that's the big takeaway from this. Don't agree to do a debate with something like this if you're not willing to take the time and think about what are all the possible avenues that they might bring up in this type of conversation, and then how might I respond to them and really be prepared for that in a rigorous way. And then also maybe just consider not doing this, because these things they're awful. They're just bad. I've critiqued Jubilee before. I think this is similar, and this is a bit better format than Jubilee, but it's still just pretty bad in that this is not conducive to an actual conversation that gets to the truth, because of people just cutting each other off, because of the low time restraints, because there is a huge just asymmetric power imbalance between the fact that she gets to prepare her thoughts, she gets to decide what they're going to talk about, and I'm assuming if it's like Jubilee, I'm assuming the other ones, they don't know going into this what they're going to be talking about. That's a huge power imbalance. Now maybe this show does it differently, and if so, cool. I'm glad that does that differently. I kind of have my doubts on that though. Yeah, let me know know if there's something that you want me to make content about, or something you want me to review. Put that in the comments, and maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. Yeah, don't forget to roast me in the comments.